The midday sun beat down on Morgan Cole's shoulders as she hauled crates of beer from her truck to the back entrance of Mirage Saloon. Sweat trickled down her spine, but she barely noticed. The physical strain was nothing compared to what she'd endured in her former life. 4 years removed from active duty, and her body still operated like the well-oiled machine the Navy SEALs had crafted. She paused at the door, setting the crate down to fish out her keys. The desert stretched behind her, an ocean of sand and scrub brush that seemed to ripple under the Arizona heat. Coyote Springs was the kind of town people only found if they were looking to disappear, which was precisely why Morgan had chosen it. The key caught in the lock, stubborn as always. Morgan jiggled it with practiced patience, her gaze instinctively sweeping the empty lot behind her bar. Old habits, always checking for threats, cataloging exits, maintaining situational awareness. She caught her reflection in the grimy window, tired eyes in a tanned face, dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, shoulders still squared despite the weight they carried. Inside, the saloon welcomed her with familiar darkness and the lingering smell of beer and whiskey. Morgan flipped on the lights, revealing a modest establishment with worn wooden floors, a long bar counter, and scattered tables. It wasn't much, but it was hers. A place where no one asked questions about the nightmares that woke her screaming in the dark, or the scars, both visible and invisible, that she carried from Afghanistan. She checked her watch. 3 hours before opening. Enough time to stock the bar, clean the glasses, and push away the memories that seemed to surface more frequently these days. Morgan moved behind the bar and pulled out a worn logbook, checking inventory with methodical precision. The routine tasks anchored her to the present, keeping the past at bay. But as she worked, the calendar on the wall caught her eye. September 17th, 4 years to the day since the mission that had stolen everything from her. The pain sliced through her defenses, sudden and sharp. She gripped the edge of the bar counter, knuckles whitening. She could still hear them, the last desperate transmissions of her team as the ambush unfolded. The fear in Dominic's voice as he called for backup that would arrive too late. "Morgan, we're pinned down. We need—" Static had cut him off. Then nothing. 6 of them had gone in. Only Morgan had come out, half dead and drowning in guilt. The glass in her hand shattered, bringing her back to the present. Blood mixed with shards, but she barely felt the sting. Physical pain was a mercy compared to the memories. She mechanically cleaned up the mess, bandaged her hand, and continued her preparations. By the time she flipped the sign to open, Morgan had rebuilt her walls, her expression neutral and unreadable, as the first customers filtered in. The evening crowd at the Mirage was sparse but predictable. Old man Jeffries nursing his usual whiskey in the corner, the Peterson brothers shooting pool, a handful of truckers passing through. Morgan moved between them with quiet efficiency, pouring drinks and avoiding unnecessary conversation. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cooling desert air and a woman who looked out of place in the dim bar. Elena Rodriguez had the kind of beauty that didn't require effort. Warm brown eyes, dark hair falling in gentle waves to her shoulders, and a smile that seemed genuine despite the worry lines etching the corners of her mouth. "Hey, Morgan," she said, sliding onto a stool at the bar. "Just a club soda, please." Morgan nodded, preparing the drink. Elena owned the small cafe 3 blocks down, Copper Canyon Coffee, and occasionally stopped by the Mirage after closing. They weren't exactly friends, but in a town as small as Coyote Springs, they had developed a quiet understanding. "How's Sophia?" Morgan asked, sliding the glass across the counter. Elena's face brightened at the mention of her 12-year-old daughter. "Getting too smart for her own good, asking questions I don't always have answers for." Morgan nodded, understanding more than Elena realized. Children asked direct questions. They hadn't yet learned to look away from uncomfortable truths. "Business okay?" Morgan asked, noticing the tension in Elena's shoulders. Elena's smile faltered. "It's been challenging lately." Morgan raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Some new people in town," Elena said, her voice dropping. "Men on motorcycles. They came into the cafe yesterday, made a mess, scared the customers. When I asked them to leave, they just laughed." Something cold settled in Morgan's stomach. "They threaten you." "Not directly, but—" Elena shrugged the gesture, doing little to mask her fear. "The leader, he said they'd be back, that they liked the coffee." Morgan wiped down the bar, her movements deliberate as she processed this information. How many? Finally, maybe 6. Their jackets had some kind of snake design on the back. You tell Crawford, Morgan asked, referring to the town's aging sheriff. Elena let out a humorless laugh. Bonnie Crawford couldn't handle a parking dispute, let alone whatever these men are. Morgan couldn't argue with that assessment. Sheriff Crawford was 3 years past retirement and about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Just be careful, Morgan said finally, the words feeling inadequate. Elena nodded, finishing her drink in silence before leaving a few dollars on the counter and heading out. Morgan watched her go, a strange protectiveness stirring in her chest. It was a feeling she had sworn never to indulge again, not after she'd failed so completely to protect those who had trusted her. The motorcycles arrived 2 nights later, their engines cutting through the quiet like thunder across the desert. Morgan heard them before she saw them, a pack of mechanical predators circling their prey. They pulled up outside the Mirage, 5 bikes gleaming under the neon sign. The riders dismounted with casual arrogance, leather jackets emblazoned with a coiled viper on the back. Morgan watched through the window as they laughed and shoved each other, marking their territory. The moment they pushed through the door, the atmosphere in the bar changed. Conversations died. The Peterson brothers abandoned their pool game. Old man Jeffries hunched further over his whiskey. The leader scanned the room with cold precision before his gaze landed on Morgan. He was tall and lean, with the hard-muscled build of someone who understood violence intimately. His blonde hair was cropped, short military style, and a thin scar bisected his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that caught Morgan's attention, pale blue and utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. He approached the bar, his men spreading out behind him like a tactical formation. "What'll it be?" Morgan asked, her voice neutral, despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. These weren't ordinary troublemakers. They moved with the coordinated awareness of men who had seen combat. "Whiskey," the leader said, his voice carrying a hint of southern drawl. "For me and my brothers." He leaned against the bar, studying her with unsettling intensity. "Name's Vince. Vince Keller." Morgan poured 5 whiskeys without comment, sliding them across the bar. "Quiet place you got here," Vince remarked, his gaze sweeping the room. "Quaint. Reminds me of some shitholes I've seen overseas." Morgan remained silent, recognizing the probe for what it was. He was fishing for information, trying to gauge her reaction. One of his men, a heavily tattooed behemoth with a shaved head, snickered. "Boss, I think she's shy." Vince's mouth curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. "Nah, Hammer. I think she's just careful. Aren't you, sweetheart?" "That'll be $30, Morgan said, ignoring the bait. Vince laid 2 20s on the bar, pushing them toward her with one finger. "Keep the change. Consider it a down payment on our future relationship." Morgan's expression remained impassive. "Just passing through. Actually, we're settling in. Coyote Springs has potential, the kind of place that could benefit from some new blood." Vince knocked back his whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club. We provide certain services to communities like this." "We don't need services," Morgan said. Vince's smile tightened. "Everyone needs protection, sweetheart, especially isolated businesses like this one. Accidents happen, fires start, inventory goes missing." The threat hung in the air, clear as the desert sky at noon. "Mirage Saloon doesn't need protection," Morgan said, her voice steady. "But thanks for the offer." A dangerous glint appeared in Vince's eyes, quickly masked by a casual shrug. "Your call, for now." He straightened, signaling to his men. "We'll be around. Think about it." They downed their drinks and sauntered out, leaving a silence heavy with unspoken fear. Morgan watched through the window as they mounted their bikes and roared away, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. The Peterson brothers looked at her with wide eyes. Old man Jeffries muttered something into his whiskey about the end of peaceful days. Morgan said nothing, but her mind was already racing, calculating risks and weaknesses. The Desert Vipers hadn't arrived in Coyote Springs by accident, and she doubted they'd be discouraged by a simple refusal. She closed early that night, locking the doors and checking the windows twice before retreating to her small apartment above the saloon. Sleep eluded her, as it often did. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut lazy circles through the darkness. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, the nightmares were waiting. She was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, dust in her mouth and the echo of gunfire in her ears. Her team was scattered, taking fire from unseen enemies who seemed to know exactly where they would be. Morgan, we're pinned down. Dominic's voice crackled through the radio. They knew we were coming. In the dream, Morgan ran toward his position, but the narrow mountain pass stretched endlessly before her. She could hear the firefight, could smell the gunpowder and blood, but she couldn't reach them. Morgan. Dominic's voice filled with a fear she'd never heard from him before. Morgan, where? The explosion cut him off, a blinding flash that jerked Morgan awake, her body drenched in sweat and her heart hammering against her ribs. She sat up, gasping for breath, the ghost of Dominic's voice still echoing in her ears. Dawn was breaking outside her window, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Morgan pulled herself from bed, muscles aching with remembered tension. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Just another day, she told herself, the words hollow in the quiet apartment. But even as she prepared for the day ahead, Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The desert vipers had brought a shadow to Coyote Springs, and she feared it was only the beginning. Elena's cafe was unusually quiet when Morgan stopped by for her morning coffee. The cheerful bell above the door announced her arrival, but there were only 2 occupied tables in a space that normally buzzed with locals seeking caffeine and conversation. Elena emerged from the kitchen, her smile strained. Morning, Morgan, the usual. Morgan nodded, taking a seat at the counter. The cafe bore Elena's personal touches, colorful Mexican tiles, potted cacti in hand-painted pots, and framed photographs of desert landscapes. It was warm and welcoming, everything the Mirage wasn't. Slow morning, Morgan asked as Elena prepared her black coffee. Elena glanced around the empty cafe, her shoulders tense. They came back yesterday afternoon. Those men on motorcycles. Morgan's hand tightened around her mug. What happened? They took up a table, ordered coffee, and just sat there for 3 hours. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. They barely spoke, just watched everyone. My regular customers left. By closing time, it was just them. Did they threaten you? Not with words. Elena pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture. The leader, Vince, he said his name was, he left a $100 bill for a $20 tab. Told me it was for future considerations. Morgan's jaw tightened. Classic intimidation tactics. Make your presence known, establish dominance, then offer protection against the very threat you pose. Where was Sophia? The question slipped out before Morgan could stop it. At school, thank God. Elena's expression softened momentarily. She's staying with my sister in Phoenix for a few days. I told her it was for a school project, but... She trailed off, her eyes meeting Morgan's. I'm scared, Morgan. These men, they're not just passing through. Morgan wanted to offer reassurance, but platitudes had never been her style. Be careful, Elena. If they come back, don't challenge them. Just call me. Elena studied her with a questioning look. Why do I get the feeling you've dealt with men like this before? Morgan drained her coffee, avoiding the question. Just call me, she repeated, leaving money on the counter before heading out. Outside, the morning heat was already building, the sun climbing a cloudless sky. Morgan walked back toward the Mirage, her mind turning over the desert viper's arrival in Coyote Springs. Small desert towns weren't random targets. They wanted something specific. A distribution route, maybe, or a base of operations away from law enforcement scrutiny. Morgan was so lost in thought that she almost missed it. The black motorcycle parked across the street from the Mirage, its rider leaning against it with calculated casualness. It was one of Vince's men watching her bar with predatory patience. Their eyes met across the street. The man, Hammer Vince had called him, grinned and tipped an imaginary hat before starting his bike and roaring away. The message was clear, they were watching, waiting. Morgan entered the Mirage, locking the door behind her, even though opening time was hours away. She moved through the empty bar to her office in the back, a small room with a desk, filing cabinet, and a safe bolted to the floor. She knelt before the safe, spinning the combination with practiced ease. Inside lay the remnants of her previous life, her service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226 that had seen her through countless operations, a combat knife with an eagle etched on the blade, a small medical kit, and a satellite phone she kept charged but had never used. Beneath these lay a sealed envelope containing documents from her final mission. copies she wasn't supposed to have, intelligence reports, operational plans, and the death certificates of her team members. She hadn't looked at them since arriving in Coyote Springs, unable to face the cold bureaucratic accounting of lives she had failed to save. Now she carefully unsealed the envelope and spread the documents across her desk. 6 faces stared back at her from personnel files. Her team. Reed Harper, the tactical genius with a Texas drawl and a talent for languages. Maria Diaz, their communications specialist, who could hack any system. Brian Chen, the medic, who played classical piano to unwind. James Wolford, their sniper with uncanny patience. Ethan Miller, the newest member, barely 25 and eager to prove himself. And Dominic Reese, their team leader. The man who had seen through Morgan's walls from day one, who had earned her trust, and though she never admitted it, something deeper. His photo showed a man in his mid-30s with serious brown eyes and the hint of a smile. Morgan's fingers hovered over his image, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. They had been conducting surveillance on a suspected weapons cache in a remote Afghan village when everything went sideways. The intelligence had been solid, or so they thought. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. Someone had known their route, their timeline, their extraction plan. Someone had betrayed them. The official report called it operational security failure. Morgan called it murder. She had been scouting ahead when the ambush happened. By the time she fought her way back to their position, it was too late. The explosion had left nothing but a smoking crater and scattered remains. She'd been recovered 2 days later by a search team, half dead from blood loss and exposure. Morgan gathered the documents, returning them to the envelope with a sense of grim resolve. The Desert Viper's arrival had awakened something she tried to bury, the tactical mindset that had kept her alive through years of high-risk operations. Coyote Springs was her home now, and she wouldn't let it fall to predators without a fight. She returned the envelope to the safe but left the Sig Sauer out, checking it with automatic precision. Fully loaded, safety on. She tucked it into the waistband of her jeans, the weight familiar against her spine, just in case. The Desert Vipers maintained a presence in Coyote Springs over the next week, their motorcycles becoming an increasingly common sight on Main Street. They established a pattern, appearing at local businesses, lingering just long enough to make customers uncomfortable, leaving outsized tips with veiled warnings about staying safe. Morgan watched and waited, gathering information as methodically as she once had in hostile territory. The Vipers had taken over the abandoned gas station on the edge of town, turning it into a makeshift clubhouse. 8 members so far, all with military or mercenary backgrounds, judging by their bearing and tactical awareness. They were organized, disciplined, and dangerous. Vince Keller remained the biggest enigma. Unlike his men who occasionally got rowdy at the Mirage, Vince maintained rigid control. He nursed single drinks, observed everything, and spoke little. His eyes, whenever they fell on Morgan, held an unsettling recognition, as though he knew something about her that she didn't. On Friday night, the Vipers arrived en masse, claiming the largest table at the Mirage. The few regular customers quickly paid their tabs and left, leaving Morgan alone with the motorcycle gang. She served them with detached efficiency, keeping her expression neutral despite the growing tension. "Business seems slow," Vince remarked as she delivered another round of drinks. "Shame." "We manage," Morgan replied, "for now." Vince leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know I can't shake the feeling we've met before." Morgan met his gaze evenly. "We haven't." "Maybe not directly." His smile was cold. "But I've known people like you. Military, right, not regular army though. Something more specialized." Morgan said nothing, turning to leave, but Vince caught her wrist. His grip was firm, but not painful. Yet. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The Desert Vipers are establishing a presence in this area. Every business pays for protection, 15% of weekly revenue. In return, they ensure nothing. Unfortunate happens." Morgan looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. "Not interested." "It wasn't a request." Vince's smile vanished. "The cafe owner already understands the arrangement. Smart woman, that one. You should follow her example." A cold fury washed through Morgan at the mention of Elena. "Get out," she said quietly. Vince blinked, surprise flickering across his features. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Finish your drinks and get out of my bar." The other Vipers tensed hands, moving toward concealed weapons. Morgan stood her ground, acutely aware of the Sig Sauer at her back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vince laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." He rose slowly, towering over her. "But guts won't save this place when we decide to take it." He tossed bills onto the table. "We'll be seeing you real soon, Morgan Cole." The use of her full name sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't introduced herself that way to anyone in Coyote Springs. The Vipers filed out, engines roaring to life in the parking lot. Morgan watched them go, her mind racing. Vince knew her name. Had he just been doing his homework on local business owners, or was there something more? As she collected glasses from their table, something caught her eye. A small photograph that must have fallen from one of their pockets. Morgan picked it up, turning it over. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The photo showed Vince standing next to a man in desert camouflage, both grinning at the camera, with mountains rising in the background. The other man was Reed Harper, her teammate, her friend, who had died in that Afghan valley 4 years ago. Morgan sank into a chair, the photograph trembling in her hand. It wasn't possible. Reed had died. She'd seen the explosion, had read the death certificate with her own eyes. Yet here was evidence suggesting not only that Vince had known Reed, but that they had been friendly enough to pose for photographs together. Questions tumbled through her mind. Was this taken before the ambush? Was Vince somehow connected to what happened to her team? She flipped the photo over, scrawled on the back in faded ink, "Kandahar 2018, just months before the fatal mission. Morgan slipped the photograph into her pocket, her hand brushing against the grip of her concealed weapon. The Desert Vipers weren't just a random threat to her new life. Somehow they were connected to the past she'd tried to leave behind. And Vince Keller might hold the answers to questions that had haunted her for 4 years. Sleep abandoned Morgan that night, leaving her to pace the confines of her apartment like a caged animal. The photograph lay on her kitchen table, a taunting reminder that the past was never truly buried. At dawn, she made a decision. If Vince knew Reed, he might know what really happened in Afghanistan, which meant Morgan needed to know more about Vince Keller and the Desert Vipers before confronting them directly. She needed allies' information and a plan, and she knew exactly where to start. The county sheriff's department was located in Mesquite Junction, a larger town about 40 miles from Coyote Springs. Morgan made the drive under a sky streaked with pink and gold, the desert awakening around her. She hadn't been to Mesquite Junction in months, preferring the isolation of her adopted hometown, but necessity overruled comfort. The sheriff's department occupied a squat brick building with an American flag hanging limply in the still morning air. Morgan parked her truck and entered the air conditioning, a shock after the growing heat outside. A young deputy looked up from the front desk, his expression shifting from boredom to interest as he took in the sight of her. "Help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for Lucas Reeves," Morgan said. "Sheriff's out on patrol. Should be back within the hour. You can wait if you want." He gestured to a row of plastic chairs against the wall. Morgan nodded her thanks and took a seat, settling in for the wait. Her mind drifted to the last time she'd seen Lucas Reeves. In a military hospital in Germany, his face grim as he delivered the news that the rest of her team had been confirmed dead. He'd been with the rescue unit that found her half dead and still trying to reach her team's last known position. Lucas had been kind in his gruff way. He'd arranged for her medical discharge, helped with the paperwork, ensured she received the benefits she was entitled to. Then he disappeared from her life, reappearing months later as the sheriff of Mesquite Junction County. They'd spoken briefly when Morgan moved to Coyote Springs, an awkward conversation that acknowledged their shared history without delving into painful details. The station door swung open and Lucas Reeves stepped in, looking exactly as Morgan remembered him. Tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, and a weathered face that had seen its share of trouble. His uniform was dusty, and fatigue shadowed his eyes. He stopped short when he saw her surprise, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Morgan Cole," he said, her name carrying the weight of unspoken history. "It's been a while." Morgan stood. "I need to talk to you privately." Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a door at the back of the room. "My office?" She followed him past the curious gaze of the young deputy and into a small office that smelled of coffee and gun oil. Lucas closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. "You look good," he said, settling behind his desk. "Civilian life suits you." "I need information," Morgan said, ignoring the pleasantry. About a group called the Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club. Lucas's expression hardened. Why? Morgan pulled out the photograph and placed it on the desk between them. Their leader, Vince Keller, knew Reed Harper. Lucas picked up the photo, his face impossible to read. Where did you get this? Keller dropped it in my bar last night. The Desert Vipers have moved into Coyote Springs. They're pressuring local businesses for protection money. Lucas set the photo down with deliberate care. And you think there's a connection to what happened to your team? It wasn't a question, but Morgan answered anyway. I don't believe in coincidences. Vince Keller shows up in my town, knows my name, and just happens to have a photo with a man who supposedly died 4 years ago. Lucas sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. The Desert Vipers are on our radar, former military and mercenaries who've organized into an outlaw motorcycle club. We believe they're involved in weapons trafficking and drug distribution across state lines, but they're careful. They leave minimal evidence, and witnesses have a habit of disappearing. And Keller, Vincent Keller, ex-Army Ranger turned private military contractor, worked for several security firms in Afghanistan and Iraq. No convictions, but he's been a person of interest in multiple investigations. Lucas leaned forward. Morgan, if the Vipers are in Coyote Springs, you need to be careful. These aren't ordinary criminals. They're trained killers with a network of connections. Morgan met his gaze steadily. So am I. You're a bartender now, Lucas said, his voice softening. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Let law enforcement handle this. Like you've handled it so far. Morgan stood, reclaiming the photograph. They're terrorizing my town. They've threatened my neighbors. Lucas caught the slight hesitation. You've made friends there. Morgan thought of Elena and Sophia, of the quiet life she'd built in Coyote Springs. I've made a home, she said finally. Lucas studied her for a long moment. I'll see what I can dig up on Keller and his connection to Reed. But Morgan promised me you won't do anything reckless. These men are dangerous. I'm aware of the threat assessment, Morgan said, the formal military phrasing slipping out unconsciously. A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. Some habits die hard, huh? Morgan didn't return the smile. Thank you for your help, Sheriff. Morgan, Lucas called as she reached the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened to your team, all of them, especially Dominic. I know you and he were close. Morgan froze her hand on the doorknob. She hadn't told Lucas about her feelings for Dominic. No one had known. We were teammates, she said carefully. Lucas nodded, but his eyes held a knowing sadness. Of course, just teammates. Morgan left without another word, unsettled by the exchange. As she walked to her truck, she couldn't shake the feeling that Lucas Reeves knew more than he was saying. About the Desert Vipers, about Reed Harper, maybe even about what had happened in Afghanistan. The drive back to Coyote Springs gave her time to think, to formulate a plan. She needed more information, but she also needed to prepare for whatever the Desert Vipers had planned. If they were as dangerous as Lucas suggested, the threats to local businesses were just the beginning. As she crested the final hill before Coyote Springs, Morgan saw smoke rising from the direction of Main Street. Her heart stuttered, then raced as she pressed the accelerator to the floor, sending her truck hurtling toward town. The smoke led her to Copper Canyon Coffee, Elena's cafe. Fire trucks were already on the scene, volunteers from the town's meager fire department spraying water on the smoldering building. A crowd had gathered, watching with stunned expressions as smoke billowed from broken windows. Morgan parked haphazardly and pushed through the onlookers, scanning frantically for Elena. She found her sitting on the curb across the street, a blanket draped over her shoulders despite the heat. Elena's face was streaked with soot and tears, her eyes vacant with shock. Elena, Morgan knelt beside her, gently taking her hands. Are you hurt? Elena looked at her, recognition dawning slowly. Morgan, they burned it. My cafe. Who? Morgan asked, though she already knew the answer. 3 men on motorcycles. They came in just after opening. No customers yet, thank God. Elena's voice was monotone, detached. They said it was a demonstration, that what happened to my cafe could happen to any business that didn't pay for protection. Rage bloomed in Morgan's chest, hot and fierce. Did they hurt you? Elena shook her head. They made sure I got out. They wanted me to see it burn, to tell others. Morgan helped Elena to her feet. Come on, you're staying with me tonight. Sophia, Elena murmured. She can't see this. She can't come back until they're gone. We'll call your sister, Morgan promised, guiding Elena toward her truck. Sophia will stay in Phoenix until it's safe. As they drove to the Mirage, Morgan's mind shifted into operational planning mode. The Desert Vipers had escalated from threats to action, demonstrating both their intentions and their ruthlessness. They wouldn't stop with Elena's cafe. Every business in Coyote Springs was now at risk, including the Mirage. More importantly, people Morgan cared about were in danger. She'd come to Coyote Springs seeking anonymity and peace, but instead she'd found a community that, despite her best efforts to remain detached, had become important to her. She helped Elena into her apartment above the bar, settling her on the couch with a glass of water and a promise to return shortly. Then she descended to the empty bar below, pulled out her phone, and made a call she'd hoped never to make. The number rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Walsh." Morgan closed her eyes, memories flooding back at the sound of that voice. "Free, it's Morgan Cole." A long pause. "Holy shit, Morgan, is that really you?" "I need your help," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Morgan Cole didn't ask for help. She handled things herself, but this was bigger than her pride. "Where are you?" Avery asked, his tone shifting from surprise to concern. "Coyote Springs, Arizona. I own a bar here." "A bar you just—" Avery's laugh was tinged with disbelief. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I." Morgan took a deep breath. I've got a situation here. There's a group called the Desert Vipers. Former military turned outlaw bikers," Avery interrupted. "Yeah, I know them. Bad news." Morgan blinked, surprise. "How do you—" "I've been tracking them for a while," Avery said. "After I left the service, I went into private security consulting. The Vipers have been on my radar for about 2 years now. They're into weapons, drugs, extortion, you name it. They're here in Coyote Springs," Morgan said, "and their leader, Vince Keller, had a photograph of Reed Harper, taken in Kandahar 2018. Silence stretched across the line. "Avery, I'll be there tomorrow," he said, finally, his voice tight. "Don't do anything until I arrive. And Morgan, be careful. Keller isn't just dangerous. He's connected." The call ended, leaving Morgan with more questions than answers. Avery had recognized the Desert Vipers immediately and reacted strongly to the mention of Reed and Vince together. What wasn't he telling her? Morgan moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. Night was falling, the desert cooling as the sun dipped below the horizon. Somewhere out there, the Desert Vipers were planning their next move, unaware that Morgan Cole was planning hers. She touched the scar on her side, a souvenir from the explosion that had taken her team. For 4 years, she'd been running from the past, burying her grief and guilt beneath the monotony of civilian life. Now the past had found her, bringing with it a chance she never thought she'd have. To discover the truth about what happened in Afghanistan, and maybe, just maybe, to find some measure of justice for her fallen teammates. For Dominic. The thought of him sent a familiar ache through her chest. She'd never told him how she felt, always putting the mission first, maintaining professional distance. And then it was too late. Morgan returned to her apartment to find Elena asleep on the couch, her face troubled even in unconsciousness. Looking at her, Morgan made a silent vow. She wouldn't fail again. She wouldn't lose anyone else to violence and betrayal. The Desert Vipers had brought war to Coyote Springs. They just didn't realize they were facing an enemy who had nothing left to lose. Avery Walsh arrived the next day in a dust-covered Jeep, looking both familiar and strange to Morgan's eyes. 4 years had added streaks of gray to his dark hair and new lines around his eyes, but he still moved with the fluid grace of a predator, alert and dangerous despite his casual clothing. Morgan watched from the Mirage's doorway as he parked and stepped out, scanning the street with the automatic vigilance of someone who had spent too long in hostile territory. His gaze found her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Survivors of a life most people couldn't imagine. Then Avery smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Morgan Cole, bartender, who'd have thought?" "Not me," Morgan admitted, stepping forward to meet him. They didn't embrace. Neither of them had ever been comfortable with physical displays of affection, but Avery clasped her shoulder briefly, the gesture conveying what words could not. "You look good," he said. "Civilian life agrees with you." "Most days," Morgan replied, leading him into the bar. She locked the door behind them. The Mirage wouldn't open for hours yet, and gestured for him to take a seat. Avery settled into a chair, his expression growing serious. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Morgan recounted the Desert Viper's arrival in Coyote Springs, their escalating threats, and the burning of Elena's cafe. She showed him the photograph of Vince and Reed, watching his reaction carefully. Avery studied the image for a long moment, his face unreadable. I need a drink for this conversation, he said finally. Morgan poured 2 glasses of whiskey, though it was barely noon. Some revelations required liquid courage, even for former Navy SEALs. There's something you should know, Avery said after taking a long swallow. About what happened in Afghanistan. Morgan stilled every nerve, suddenly alert. What about it? The official report was bullshit. Avery set his glass down, meeting her gaze directly. Your team wasn't the victim of an operational security failure. They were betrayed. Betrayed. The word felt like gravel in Morgan's throat. By who? That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past 4 years, Avery said. Someone sold information about your mission to the enemy, routes, timeline, extraction plan, everything they needed to set up the perfect ambush. Morgan's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never seen before. How do you know this? Because I was supposed to be there, Avery said quietly. I was scheduled for that mission, but I got pulled at the last minute for a priority assignment that turned out to be nothing but babysitting a visiting congressman. By the time I got back, you were in a hospital in Germany, and everyone else was dead. He took another drink, his hand not quite steady. It didn't sit right with me. None of it did. So I started asking questions. The kind that gets you invited to meetings with serious men who suggest you stop asking. And Reed? Morgan couldn't keep the tension from her voice. The photo with Vince, Avery's expression darkened. Reed Harper's body was never recovered from the explosion site. There were remains, but they were fragmentary. Identification was based on personal effects and positioning. You're saying he could have survived? Hope flared briefly in Morgan's chest, painful in its intensity. I'm saying there's a possibility that Reed wasn't killed in that blast. Avery leaned forward. Morgan, the man who set up your team, could have been Reed Harper himself. The accusation hung in the air between them, monstrous and unthinkable. Reed, the quiet Texan who had saved Morgan's life more than once, who had shared his rations with Afghan children, who had carried a photo of his mother in his helmet. A traitor, no, Morgan said, the denial automatic. Reed wouldn't. I don't want to believe it either, Avery interrupted, but consider the evidence. Reed's body was never definitively identified. He had connections throughout the region from previous deployments. And now we find out he knew Vince Keller, a man with ties to private military contractors who might have paid handsomely for intelligence on U.S. operations. Morgan stood unable to remain still as her world tilted on its axis. Why would Reed betray his own team, his friends? Money, ideology, coercion, ego. The same reasons anyone betrays their country, Avery said grimly. Or maybe he didn't intend for everyone to die. Maybe it was supposed to be a capture, not a massacre, and things went wrong. Morgan paced the length of the bar, her mind grappling with this new reality. If Reed had betrayed them, if he was still alive, and if he was somehow connected to the Desert Vipers. We need to find out if Reed is here in Coyote Springs, she said, turning back to Avery. If he's one of the Vipers. Avery nodded. We need surveillance on their base, see who comes and goes. And Vince Keller, Morgan asked. He knows something about what happened. I'm sure of it. We approach carefully, Avery cautioned. If Keller realizes you're investigating him, not just resisting his extortion, the stakes change completely. Morgan's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it, frowning at the unknown number. I know who you are, Morgan Cole. SEAL Team 6 Afghanistan 2019. We need to talk. Alone, tonight, 10 p.m. The old mining road 2 miles east of town. Come alone or don't come at all. She showed the message to Avery, whose expression darkened. It's a trap, he said immediately. Probably, Morgan agreed, but it's also the first direct link to what happened in Afghanistan. I have to go. Not alone, Avery insisted. Morgan thought for a moment. You'll be my overwatch. Like old times. Avery nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Like old times. As they began planning for the night's meeting, Morgan felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. For 4 years, she'd been haunted by unanswered questions about the ambush that killed her team. Now those answers might be within reach, if she survived long enough to hear them. Upstairs, Elena still slept exhausted by grief and fear. Outside, Coyote Springs continued its quiet desert existence, unaware of the storms gathering on the horizon. And somewhere nearby, the desert vipers waited, harboring secrets that could either heal Morgan's wounds or tear them open forever. The sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, counting down the hours until Morgan would face her past, and possibly the man who had destroyed it. The desert night wrapped around Morgan like a familiar blanket as she positioned her truck at the turnoff to the old mining road. Stars punctured the vast blackness overhead, impossibly bright without city lights to dim their glow. A quarter moon provided just enough illumination to make out the contours of the landscape, the jagged silhouettes of cacti, the gentle slope of distant hills. She checked her watch, 9:42 p.m. She was early, deliberately so. In her experience, arriving first to a meeting point was always tactically advantageous. In position, Avery's voice crackled through the small earpiece she wore. He had set up on a ridge overlooking the meeting spot, his sniper rifle assembled and ready. Old habits died hard. "Copy," Morgan murmured, checking her Sig Sauer one final time before tucking it into her waistband and covering it with her jacket. She also carried a combat knife strapped to her ankle and a small flashlight that could double as a striking weapon if necessary. The quiet hum of an approaching engine broke the stillness. Morgan tensed eyes tracking the dust cloud illuminated by headlights in the distance. A single vehicle moving cautiously along the uneven mining road. "Incoming," she whispered. "One vehicle. SUV, maybe." "I see it," Avery confirmed. "Stay sharp." The vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, stopped about 50 yards from Morgan's position. Its headlights remained on, casting long shadows across the desert floor and effectively concealing whoever was inside. Classic intimidation tactic. Morgan didn't move. Let them come to her. After a long moment, the driver's door opened and a figure stepped out. Tall male, moving with cautious precision. The headlights silhouetted him, making identification impossible. "Morgan Cole," the voice carried clearly across the distance. "Depends who's asking," Morgan replied, hand instinctively moving closer to her concealed weapon. The figure took a few steps forward, still mostly in shadow. "I have information about what happened to your team in Afghanistan. Information you need to hear." "Show yourself," Morgan demanded. The man moved to the side, stepping out of the glare of the headlights. As his features became visible, Morgan's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Vince Keller. It wasn't Reed Harper. It was Dr. Maya Chen, the town's physician dressed in men's clothing, with her hair tucked under a cap. Dr. Chen, well, Morgan's confusion momentarily overrode her caution. "I'm sorry for the deception," Maya said, removing the cap to let her dark hair fall free. "I couldn't risk being followed. The Vipers have eyes everywhere." "What is this?" Morgan asked, maintaining her distance. She'd spoken to Dr. Chen maybe twice since moving to Coyote Springs, once for a required physical to get her liquor license, and once for stitches after a bar fight she'd broken up. The doctor had been professional, detached, and unmemorable, exactly how Morgan preferred her interactions. "I know who you are," Maya said, moving closer. "Former Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the training, part of the team that was ambushed in Afghanistan 4 years ago." Through her earpiece, Morgan heard Avery's concerned voice. "Morgan, what's happening? Who is that?" "How do you know that?" Morgan asked Maya, ignoring Avery for the moment. "Because I was there," Maya replied. "Not on your team. I was stationed at the forward operating base where your mission originated. I was the one who treated you when they brought you in." Morgan's mind raced, trying to recall the chaotic hours after her rescue. She remembered pain, morphine-induced haze fragments of conversations and procedures. But the faces of the medical staff remained a blur. "I don't remember you," she said finally. "You were in and out of consciousness," Maya acknowledged. "But I remember you. I was the one who had to tell you that your team didn't make it." A phantom pain shot through Morgan's side where the shrapnel had torn into her flesh. "Why are you in Coyote Springs?" "The same reason you are," Maya said with a tired smile. "Running from ghosts." Morgan studied the woman before her reassessing. Dr. Maya Chen was perhaps in her early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a composed demeanor that spoke of someone accustomed to crisis. Nothing about her had ever triggered Morgan's instincts before, but now she wondered how much of Maya's unremarkable presence had been carefully constructed. "What information do you have about my team?" Morgan asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Maya glanced around nervously. "Not here. It's not safe. Can we talk somewhere private?" "Doctor," Morgan said, her patience wearing thin, "you lured me out here with the promise of information. Either deliver or I'm leaving." Maya sighed. "Fine. Your teammate Reed Harper isn't dead." Even though Avery had suggested this possibility, hearing it confirmed sent a shock through Morgan's system. "You've seen him." "No," Maya admitted, "but I've seen evidence. Medical records that were falsified, DNA tests that didn't match but were pushed through anyway. There was a cover-up, Morgan. Someone wanted Reed Harper officially dead." "Why? That's the question, isn't it?" Maya's expression hardened. "After your team was ambushed, things happened at the base. Files disappeared. People were transferred suddenly. Questions were discouraged. And you started asking those questions anyway," Morgan guessed. Maya nodded. "I noticed discrepancies in the medical records, inconsistencies in the official reports. When I brought them up to my superior, I was told to drop it. 2 days later, I was informed that my tour was being cut short for administrative reasons." "So you think Reed is alive," Morgan said, processing this information, "and somehow connected to the Desert Vipers showing up in Coyote Springs?" "I don't believe in coincidences," Maya replied unconsciously, echoing Morgan's own words to Lucas earlier. "Vince Keller arrives with his gang, and suddenly I start seeing familiar patterns. Communications disrupted, strange vehicles passing through at night. The same signs I saw before everything went wrong in Afghanistan." Morgan was silent for a moment, weighing the doctor's words against what she already knew. Maya's account aligned with Avery's suspicions, but something still felt off. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" Morgan asked. "Why all this cloak and dagger business?" "Because I don't know who to trust," Maya said simply. "And because the moment the Vipers arrived, I noticed someone watching my clinic. Not them, someone else. I think we're all being monitored." A chill ran down Morgan's spine that had nothing to do with the desert night. "What exactly are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I'm suggesting that whatever happened to your team, whatever Reed Harper's involvement might have been, it's bigger than a simple betrayal." Maya stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I think it goes all the way up the chain of command, and I think it followed us here. Us, people connected to what happened. You, me." Maya hesitated. "Sheriff Reeves." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Lucas, what does he have to do with this?" "He was stationed at the same base working with intelligence. He would have had access to the mission details, routes, extraction plans, and he was one of the first on the scene after the ambush." Morgan's mind flashed back to her meeting with Lucas, his knowing comment about her relationship with Dominic, his vague responses about the Desert Vipers. Could he have been involved? The possibility made her stomach twist. "I need proof," Morgan said finally, "not theories or coincidences." Maya reached into her pocket and withdrew a small flash drive. "Everything I've managed to gather is on here. Medical records, personnel files, communication logs. It's not conclusive, but it's a start." Morgan took the drive, turning it over in her fingers. "Why now? Why are you coming forward after 4 years?" "Because they're here," Maya said, fear flickering across her features. "And because they burned down Elena's cafe. Next time it might be my clinic, or someone might get hurt. I took an oath to do no harm, Morgan. That includes by inaction." Before Morgan could respond, Avery's urgent voice came through her earpiece. "Morgan, we've got company. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south." Morgan tensed, scanning the horizon. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of headlights bouncing along the uneven terrain. "We need to go," she told Maya. "Now." Maya followed her gaze, face paling as she spotted the approaching lights. "They followed me. I was careful, but they must have—" "Later," Morgan cut her off. "My truck, move." They sprinted to Morgan's vehicle, dust swirling around their boots. Morgan slid behind the wheel while Maya scrambled into the passenger seat. "Avery, fall back to the secondary position," Morgan said into her earpiece as she started the engine. "I've got Dr. Chen with me. We're heading to the fallback location." Copy that, Avery replied. Be careful. I count at least 3 vehicles moving fast. Morgan threw the truck into gear and accelerated away from the approaching headlights, taking a narrow side trail that branched off from the mining road. The truck bounced and rattled over the uneven ground, but Morgan handled it with the skill of someone who had driven in far worse conditions. Where are we going? Maya asked, bracing herself against the dashboard as they navigated a particularly rough stretch. Somewhere safe, Morgan replied, eyes fixed on the barely visible trail ahead. I hope. The somewhere safe turned out to be an abandoned hunting cabin nestled in a small canyon about 15 miles from Coyote Springs. Morgan had discovered it during one of her solitary explorations of the surrounding wilderness and had quietly stocked it with emergency supplies: water, non-perishable food, first aid kit, ammunition. She parked the truck in a natural depression behind the cabin where it would be hidden from aerial observation. Maya followed her inside, looking around at the sparse accommodations with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Does anyone else know about this place? She asked. Just Avery, Morgan replied, checking the perimeter through the cabin's grimy windows. And now you. The cabin consisted of a single room with a small wood stove, a rickety table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. A kerosene lamp provided the only illumination, casting long shadows across the rough wooden floors. Morgan's phone buzzed with a text from Avery. Lost the tail, will circle back and approach from the north. ETA 45 minutes. Avery's on his way, she told Maya. In the meantime, I want to hear everything you know, from the beginning. Maya sank into one of the chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. It started after your team was ambushed. I was on duty when it brought you in, the sole survivor, half dead from blood loss and exposure. Your injuries were severe but not life-threatening with proper treatment. What concerned me more was the state of shock you were in. You kept repeating the same phrases over and over. What phrases? Morgan asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. They knew we were coming, Maya quoted softly. Someone told them. Over and over, even under sedation. Morgan had no memory of this, but it aligned with her suspicions at the time. Suspicions that had been dismissed by her superiors as trauma-induced paranoia. The official investigation concluded it was an operational security failure, Maya continued, but certain things didn't add up. The way the ambush was set up, the precision of the attack, and then there were the inconsistencies in identifying the remains. Reed's remains, Morgan clarified. Maya nodded. The DNA test results were inconclusive, yet someone pushed the identification through anyway. When I questioned this, I was told that additional evidence had confirmed Harper's death, but I never saw this evidence documented anywhere. And Lucas Reeves, what was his involvement? Maya hesitated. Sheriff Reeves was part of the intelligence unit. He would have had access to your mission details, and he was one of the first to arrive at the ambush site. That doesn't make him a traitor, Morgan pointed out. No, Maya conceded, but after the ambush, he was promoted and then rapidly transitioned to civilian law enforcement. It was an unusually smooth and swift process. Morgan thought back to Lucas's help with her own transition to civilian life. Had that been genuine concern or an attempt to keep her close to monitor her? The possibility that Lucas, one of the few people she'd trusted after losing her team, might be involved in their deaths was almost too painful to contemplate. And what about Vince Keller? Morgan asked. How does he fit into all this? Keller was a private military contractor working security for a mining operation near the village where your team was ambushed, Maya explained. His company had been hired by a corporation with Pentagon contracts. On paper, they were protecting civilian engineers. Off the record, she shrugged. Who knows what they were really doing? Morgan's mind was working overtime, connecting pieces of a puzzle that had eluded her for years. So Keller and Reed knew each other. Reed possibly betrays our team. Reed is declared dead under suspicious circumstances, and now Keller shows up in the same town where I've been living. It can't be coincidence, Maya agreed. The question is, what does Keller want now? Morgan mused. Is this about finishing what they started in Afghanistan or something else entirely? Before Maya could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel announced Avery's arrival. Moments later, he entered the cabin, his rifle case slung over one shoulder. He nodded to Morgan before turning his attention to Maya, his expression guarded. Dr. Chen, he said, I understand you have information about Reed Harper. Maya repeated what she'd told Morgan, adding details about security protocols at the base and the unusual level of interest certain officials had shown in the aftermath of the ambush. Avery listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. When she finished, Avery looked to Morgan. "It fits with what I've been able to piece together. Someone betrayed your team, and Reed Harper is the most likely candidate. But the question remains, why?" "Money is the obvious answer," Morgan said. "Intelligence on U.S. operations would be valuable to any number of hostile entities." "But Reed wasn't hurting for money," Avery countered. "His family had oil money. He joined the SEALs out of patriotism, not necessity." "Ideology, then," Morgan suggested. "Maybe he became disillusioned." Avery shook his head. "Reed Harper was as committed to the mission as any of us. I never once heard him question our purpose or methods." "Coercion is another possibility," Maya interjected. "Someone might have had leverage over him." Morgan frowned, trying to recall anything from Reed's personal life that might have made him vulnerable to blackmail. He had been intensely private, rarely discussing family or relationships. A perfect candidate for turning in retrospect. "We're missing something," she said finally. "Some piece of the puzzle that would make all of this make sense." "The flash drive," Maya reminded her. "It might contain that missing piece." Morgan pulled out the small device, turning it over in her palm. "We'll need a computer." "I've got a laptop in my Jeep," Avery said, rising. "I'll get it." While Avery retrieved his computer, Morgan found herself studying Maya more carefully. The doctor's story seemed plausible, her fear genuine. But 4 years of living with betrayal had made Morgan cautious to the point of paranoia. "Why did you come to Coyote Springs?" she asked abruptly. Maya looked up, momentarily startled by the question. "After I was sent home from Afghanistan, I had trouble finding work. Hospitals suddenly had no openings despite initially showing interest. It became clear that someone had flagged my file. Small towns were the only places desperate enough for doctors to overlook whatever warning had been attached to my name. And you chose Coyote Springs specifically." "It was as far from my previous life as I could get," Maya said with a sad smile. "I thought I'd be safe here, anonymous." Morgan understood that impulse all too well. She had chosen Coyote Springs for the same reason. Its isolation, its unremarkable nature, the ease with which one could disappear into the fabric of a community that minded its own business. Avery returned with his laptop, setting it up on the rickety table. "Let's see what the doctor has found," he said, inserting the flash drive. Files populated the screen. Medical records, personnel files, mission reports, all neatly organized into folders. Maya leaned in, pointing to a specific directory. "Start with these," she suggested. "The medical examiner's reports on the remains recovered from the ambush site." Avery opened the files and they crowded around the small screen, reading in silence. The reports detailed the recovery of partial remains from the explosion site with DNA analysis attempting to match them to the 6 team members believed to have been killed. "Look at Reed's results," Maya said, indicating a section highlighted in yellow. "The confidence level on the DNA match is only 62. That's well below the threshold for a positive identification. Yet the final report declares it a confirmed match." Morgan scanned the document, her training allowing her to parse the technical language. "Someone overrode the medical examiner's concerns," she observed, noting a comment buried in the appendix. "Exactly," Maya said. "And when you compare this to the other identifications, all over 98% confidence, it raises serious questions." They continued through the files, finding more discrepancies and irregularities. Communications logs showing unusual patterns before and after the ambush. Personnel transfers that remove key witnesses from the investigation. Redacted sections of the official after-action report that made little sense given the context. One document in particular caught Morgan's attention. A list of personnel present at the forward operating base in the days leading up to the ambush. She scrolled through the names most unfamiliar until one jumped out at her. "Vincent Keller," she read aloud, "present at the base 3 days before our mission, listed as security consultant for a visiting congressional delegation." Avery leaned closer. "The same congressional delegation I was reassigned to protect." He noted, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "The assignment that kept me off your team." Morgan felt a chill run down her spine. So Keller was there when our mission was being planned. He would have had access to secure areas of the base. "Not officially," Maya corrected, "but security for contractors was notoriously lax. People came and went all the time without proper documentation. And Lucas, Morgan asked, dreading the answer. Is he on the list? Avery scrolled further, then stopped. Lieutenant Colonel Lucas Reeves, Intelligence Liaison. Present throughout the planning phase and listed as part of the recovery team. Morgan's heart sank. Lucas had been directly involved just as Maya had suggested. But did that make him complicit in the betrayal, or merely a witness to its aftermath? There's more, Maya said, reaching over to navigate to another folder. Communications logs from the day of the ambush. She opened a file containing transcripts of radio communications timestamps marking the progression of the ill-fated mission. Morgan recognized the clinical record of her team's final moments. The initial contact report, the calls for backup, the desperate attempts to coordinate a defense against overwhelming odds, and then a transmission she had never heard before. 0943 Harper Bravo. Actual, this is Echo 6. We're compromised. Repeat, we are compromised. Someone sold us out. I'm breaking comm protocol to warn you. Do not send. The transcript ended there, labeled Transmission Interrupted. Morgan stared at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. This can't be right, she said finally. Reed was warning the base. He was trying to tell them we'd been betrayed. Avery's expression was grim. If this transcript is authentic, it changes everything. Reed wasn't the traitor. He was trying to expose the traitor. And someone silenced him for it, Maya added quietly. Morgan sat back, her mind reeling. For 4 years, she had carried the weight of her team's deaths, the survivor's guilt crushing her beneath its burden. Now she was facing the possibility that not only had they been betrayed by someone they trusted, but that Reed, who she had just begun to suspect, might have died trying to save them. We need to find out who falsified the DNA results, she said, her voice hardening with resolve. Who declared Reed dead when there was insufficient evidence? And who might have actually survived that explosion, Avery added. If Reed made that transmission, then he was alive at 0943. The explosion, according to the after-action report, occurred at 0947. 4 minutes, Morgan murmured. 4 minutes to escape. Or 4 minutes to be captured, Maya suggested. If hostile forces knew who he was, what he knew. The implications hung in the air between them. If Reed had been captured rather than killed, if he had been tortured for information, if he had eventually broken, it would explain much about the current situation. We need to get back to Coyote Springs, Morgan decided. If Keller is connected to what happened, if he knows something about Reed, we need to confront him directly. That's suicide, Avery objected. The Desert Vipers aren't a bunch of amateur thugs. They're trained killers with a home field advantage. I'm not suggesting we go in guns blazing, Morgan clarified. But we need more information, and sitting out here in the wilderness isn't going to get it for us. Morgan's right, Maya said. Besides, I need to get back to my clinic. People will notice if I'm missing for too long. Avery looked between them, clearly unhappy with the decision, but unwilling to argue further. Fine, but we do this carefully, no unnecessary risks. Morgan nodded, though her mind was already mapping out a confrontation with Vince Keller. She needed answers. About Reed, about the ambush, about why they had come to Coyote Springs after all this time. Most of all, she needed to know if Dominic's death had been the result of random chance or calculated betrayal. Because if it was the latter, no force on earth would stop her from bringing those responsible to justice. They returned to Coyote Springs in the pre-dawn hours, the desert landscape ghostly under the fading moonlight. Morgan dropped Maya off a block from her clinic with instructions to maintain her normal routine and avoid any contact with the Desert Vipers. The doctor agreed, though fear shadowed her eyes as she slipped away into the darkness. Avery and Morgan continued to the Mirage, entering through the back door. Morgan immediately checked on Elena, finding her still asleep on the couch, her face troubled even in unconsciousness. The sight reinforced Morgan's determination to end the threat posed by the Desert Vipers, not just for her own sake, but for everyone in Coyote Springs who had been drawn into this web of violence and deceit. We need a plan, Avery said as they gathered in the bar's small office. A way to get close to Keller without triggering a full-scale confrontation. Morgan nodded, her tactical mind already considering and discarding options. He wants the Mirage, she said finally. Let's give him a reason to come here. Alone. You're suggesting using yourself as bait, Avery observed, his disapproval evident. I'm suggesting creating a controlled environment for an information exchange, Morgan corrected. Keller wants something from me, either protection money or something related to Afghanistan. Either way, he'll come if I offer to negotiate. And when he realizes it's a trap, it won't be a trap, Morgan said. Not exactly. I genuinely want to talk to him. I need to know what happened to Reed, what happened to my team. Keller has those answers. Avery studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're going to do this with or without my help, aren't you? Yes, Morgan admitted, but I'd prefer with. Fine, but we do this my way. Controlled environment, backup plans, emergency extraction if things go south. Morgan agreed, and they spent the next hour outlining a strategy. By the time they finished, sunlight was streaming through the office's small window, the desert day beginning in earnest. Get some rest, Morgan told Avery, showing him to a small storage room she'd converted into a makeshift bedroom for emergencies. I'll keep watch and make the call to Keller later. Avery hesitated. Morgan, about what we found on that flash drive? You know we can't trust anyone until we know who was behind the betrayal. Not even Lucas. I know. Morgan said, the admission painful. Lucas had been one of the few constants in her post-Afghanistan life, a tenuous link to a past that, for all its trauma, had once given her purpose and identity. Avery squeezed her shoulder briefly before disappearing into the storage room, leaving Morgan alone with her thoughts. She moved to the bar absently, wiping down already clean surfaces as she processed everything they had learned. Reed Harper trying to warn them about a betrayal. Lucas Reeves potentially involved in a cover-up. Vince Keller present at the base before the mission, now reappearing in her life 4 years later. It was a tangled web of connections and suspicions with no clear path to the truth. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled her from these dark thoughts. Elena appeared looking disheveled but more composed than the previous day. Morning, Morgan greeted her. Coffee. Elena nodded gratefully, sliding onto a bar stool. Thanks for everything, for giving me a place to stay. Morgan poured her a cup, saying nothing. Gratitude always made her uncomfortable. I called my sister, Elena continued. Sophia's fine. Loving Phoenix, actually. Wants to stay longer. Her attempt at a smile faltered. I told her she could, that the cafe needed some repairs. You didn't tell her what really happened, Morgan observed. She's 12, Elena said simply. She deserves to feel safe for as long as possible. Morgan thought of her own childhood, of the moment safety had become an illusion rather than a reality. For her, it had been earlier than 12. Much earlier. What will you do now, she asked. Elena shrugged, a gesture that tried for nonchalance but landed closer to despair. I don't know. Insurance will cover some of the damage, but not enough. And even if I rebuild, who's to say they won't just burn it down again? They won't, Morgan said, the promise slipping out before she could stop it. Elena looked up, surprise giving way to understanding. You're going to do something about them, aren't you? The men who burned my cafe? Morgan met her gaze steadily. Yes. Why? Elena asked. It's not your fight. They made it my fight when they came to my town, Morgan replied. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Elena studied her as if seeing her for the first time. You're not just a bartender, are you? Morgan said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. Be careful, Elena said finally. These men, they're dangerous. So am I, Morgan replied. Their conversation was interrupted by the ring of Morgan's phone. The number displayed on the screen made her breath catch. Lucas Reeves. I need to take this, she told Elena, moving away from the bar. She answered with a cautious sheriff. Morgan, Lucas's voice was tense. We need to talk, in person. After what she'd learned from Maya and the files, Morgan's instinct was to refuse. But curiosity won out. What about the Desert Vipers? I've received some concerning reports, and I think you might be in danger. I'm fine, Morgan said, keeping her tone neutral. This isn't a request, Morgan. Lucas's voice hardened. I'm on my way to Coyote Springs now. I'll be at the Mirage in an hour. The call ended before she could respond. Morgan stared at the phone, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Lucas was coming here now after everything they had discovered about his potential involvement in the Afghanistan betrayal. It couldn't be coincidence. She moved quickly to the storage room, waking Avery and updating him on the situation. Could be a trap, Avery said, immediately alert despite his interrupted rest. Or he might genuinely have information. Either way, we need to be prepared, Morgan replied. You stay out of sight. If Lucas is involved, he doesn't know you're here, and I want to keep it that way. Avery nodded. I'll be ready if things go south. Morgan returned to the bar to find Elena washing her coffee cup, a determined set to her shoulders. I should go, Elena said. Find somewhere else to stay. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, Morgan assured her. But it might be safer if you weren't here for the next few hours. I'm expecting company, the kind that asks difficult questions. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. The sheriff, Morgan nodded, surprised by Elena's perception. I'll go to Bonnie's, Elena decided, referring to Sheriff Crawford. She offered me her spare room when she heard about the cafe. Good idea, Morgan agreed, relieved that Elena would be safely away from whatever was about to unfold at the Mirage. After Elena left, Morgan prepared for Lucas's arrival. She checked her weapon, positioned it within easy reach beneath the bar, and set up the laptop in her office, ready to show Lucas the files if necessary, or to confront him with them if he proved hostile. Lucas arrived precisely 1 hour later, his sheriff's department SUV kicking up dust as it pulled into the Mirage's empty parking lot. Morgan watched through the window as he exited the vehicle, his movements betraying a tension she had rarely seen in him. He wore his uniform, his hand resting casually near his service weapon, not drawing it, but clearly aware of its presence. Morgan unlocked the door, allowing him to enter before securing it behind him. The Mirage wouldn't open for hours yet, ensuring their privacy. Morgan, Lucas, greeted her, removing his hat. Thanks for seeing me. Didn't seem like I had much choice, she replied, moving behind the bar. It was a defensive position, giving her both cover and access to her concealed weapon. What's this about? Lucas took a seat at the bar, placing his hat on the counter. The Desert Vipers, they're more dangerous than you realize. I'm aware of what they are, Morgan said carefully. No, I don't think you are. Lucas leaned forward, his expression grave. They're not just an outlaw motorcycle gang. They're something much worse. They're assets. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Assets for whom? That's the question, isn't it? Lucas ran a hand over those close-cropped hair, a gesture of frustration. Look, I've been tracking the Vipers for years, ever since Afghanistan. They operate like a private military unit, but without the oversight. They take contracts from various entities, some governmental, some not. Dirty work that can't be traced back to official channels. And what does this have to do with me? Morgan asked, though she was beginning to see the connections. Lucas met her gaze directly. They're here because you're here, Morgan. Your presence in Coyote Springs isn't a coincidence, and neither is theirs. Morgan felt a chill run down her spine, but kept her expression neutral. Go on. 4 years ago, your team was ambushed in Afghanistan. The official report called it an operational security failure, but we both know it was more than that. Lucas's voice dropped lower. Someone betrayed your team, Morgan. Someone with access to mission details, routes, timetables. Someone like you, Morgan said, the accusation hanging in the air between them. Lucas didn't flinch. I was involved in the intelligence gathering for your mission. Yes, but I wasn't the leak. Then who was? I don't know for certain, Lucas admitted, but I have suspicions, strong ones. Morgan waited, saying nothing, forcing him to continue. After the ambush, there was a cover-up, Lucas said. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses were reassigned. The investigation was rushed and incomplete. I know, Morgan replied. I've seen the files. Surprise flickered across Lucas's face. What files? Medical examiners' reports, communications logs, personnel records. Morgan watched him carefully, looking for any sign of deception, including a transmission from Reed Harper, warning that the team had been compromised. Lucas's expression darkened. Where did you get these files? Does it matter? It might, Lucas said, if they're authentic. Morgan studied him, trying to gauge his reaction. Was he genuinely surprised or merely acting? After years in special operations, she had developed a keen sense for deception, but Lucas was difficult to read. The files suggest Reed Harper might still be alive, she said finally, that his death was fabricated as part of the cover-up. Lucas was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. If Reed is alive, he said at last, then he's either a prisoner or a participant. Either way, he's the key to understanding what really happened to your team. And you think the Desert Vipers are here because of Reed? Lucas nodded. Vince Keller and Reed Harper knew each other in Afghanistan. They worked together on several operations, officially and unofficially. If Reed is still alive, if he's somehow involved with what happened to your team, then Keller would know. Why come to me now, Morgan asked. Why not when I first moved to Coyote Springs? Because until the Vipers showed up, I thought you were safe. Lucas sighed suddenly, looking older than his years. I've been watching them, Morgan. Tracking their movements, trying to figure out who they're working for and what they're after. When they came to Coyote Springs, I knew it was about you, about what happened in Afghanistan. Morgan's hand inched closer to her concealed weapon. And what exactly is your role in all this? Lucas, were you part of the betrayal or just the cover-up? Hurt flashed in Lucas's eyes. I was trying to protect you, Morgan. I've always been trying to protect you. From what? From the people who ordered the hit on your team, Lucas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. From the people who would kill to keep their involvement secret. Morgan felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. You're saying my team was deliberately targeted, that it wasn't just a betrayal for money or ideology. Your mission was never about a weapons cache, Lucas revealed. That was the cover story. You were sent to that village to eliminate a high-value target, a target that certain powerful people didn't want eliminated. Who? Morgan demanded, her voice harsh with suppressed emotion. I don't know, Lucas admitted. But whoever it was had enough influence to arrange the ambush, cover up the evidence, and make sure anyone asking questions faced consequences. Morgan's mind raced, trying to process this new information. If Lucas was telling the truth, and that remained a significant if, then the betrayal went far beyond what she had imagined. It wasn't just one traitor selling information. It was a coordinated effort to eliminate her entire team. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because the Vipers burning down that cafe was just the beginning, Lucas said grimly. They're sending a message establishing their presence. But they're here for something specific, Morgan. Something they think you have. What could I possibly have? Information, Lucas suggested. Evidence. Something that could expose whoever was behind the ambush. Morgan thought of the flash drive Maya had given her, the files detailing the inconsistencies and cover-up. And what if I do have evidence? What then? Then you're in more danger than you realize, Lucas said, and so is everyone around you. As if to punctuate his warning, the sound of motorcycle engines cut through the morning quiet. Multiple engines growing louder by the second. Morgan moved to the window, her body tensing at the sight of at least 6 motorcycles approaching the Mirage, Vince Keller at their head. They're here, she said quietly. Lucas joined her at the window, his hand moving to his service weapon. Morgan, listen to me. Whatever happens next, remember that not everything is as it seems. Trust your instincts. Before she could respond, the motorcycles pulled into the parking lot, forming a semicircle in front of the Mirage. Vince dismounted, signaling to his men to remain on their bikes. He approached the door alone, his expression cold and determined. Morgan met Lucas's gaze. Time to find out what they really want. The Desert Vipers had brought war to Coyote Springs. Now it was time to face it head-on. Vince Keller's knock echoed through the empty bar, 3 sharp raps that carried an unmistakable demand. Morgan moved toward the door, but Lucas caught her arm. Wait, he said, his voice low and urgent. We need a plan. I have one, Morgan replied gently but firmly, removing his hand. Get answers. She approached the door, conscious of Lucas positioning himself to the side out of the direct line of fire, but with a clear view of the entrance. Morgan unlocked the door, but didn't open it, calling through the wood. We're closed. Not for me, Vince replied, his voice calm and assured. We need to talk, Morgan. Just you and me. Morgan glanced back at Lucas, who gave a slight nod, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. She opened the door just enough to see Vince standing alone on the threshold, though his men remained watchful on their bikes. What do you want? She asked. Information, Vince said simply, the kind worth dying for. Whose death are we talking about? Morgan kept her tone neutral, giving nothing away. Vince's mouth curved in a humorless smile. That depends on how this conversation goes. His gaze shifted, looking past her to where Lucas stood. Sheriff Reeves didn't expect to find you here. Funny, Lucas replied. I was thinking the same about you. Tension crackled between the two men, a history Morgan couldn't decipher but could clearly sense. May I come in? Vince asked, his politeness at odds with the implicit threat of his men waiting outside. Morgan stepped back, allowing him entry but keeping a careful distance. Your men stay outside. Of course, Vince agreed, easily stepping inside. This is a private conversation. Morgan closed and locked the door, hyper-aware of the positions of both men in relation to her and to each other. Lucas had moved to lean against the bar, his posture deliberately casual, but his eyes alert. Vince stood in the center of the room, seemingly relaxed, but with the coiled readiness of a predator. "You said you wanted information," Morgan prompted, breaking the silence. "I do." Vince turned to face her fully. "Specifically, I want to know what Reed Harper told you before he died." The directness of the question caught Morgan off guard, though she kept her expression neutral. "Reed died in the explosion. He didn't tell me anything." Vince studied her, his pale eyes searching for deception. "Are you sure about that? Because my sources tell me Reed contacted you just before the ambush. A warning, perhaps, or instructions." "Your sources are wrong," Morgan said. "The last time I saw Reed alive was when I left to scout ahead. By the time I made it back to their position, it was too late." "Then you never heard his final transmission," Vince concluded, watching her reaction carefully. "The one where he warned the base that your team had been compromised." Morgan's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. Vince knew about the transmission, the same one documented in the files Maya had provided. But how and why was he asking about it now, 4 years later? If such a transmission existed, Morgan said carefully, it wasn't in the official report. No. Vince agreed it wouldn't be. Certain people made sure of that. Lucas shifted his position slightly. "What's your interest in this, Keller? Last I checked, you were working security for a mining operation, not investigating military operations." Vince's attention turned to Lucas, his expression hardening. "Let's not play games, Sheriff. We both know I was doing more than security in Afghanistan, just like we both know who really sent Morgan's team into that village." Lucas's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his weapon. "Careful, Keller. You're making accusations without evidence." "Am I?" Vince turned back to Morgan. "Did you ever wonder why your team was sent to that particular village? Why the intelligence was so specific about the location of the supposed weapons cache? Why you were ordered to approach from the south through a narrow valley with limited visibility and no escape routes?" Morgan had wondered all of these things in the long, sleepless nights after the ambush. The mission parameters had felt off from the beginning, but she trusted her commanding officers, trusted the system. A mistake that had cost her everything. "You're suggesting it was a setup from the start," she said, voicing the terrible suspicion she'd harbored for years. "Not a suggestion," Vince corrected. "A fact. Your team was sent to die, Morgan. The only question is why." Lucas pushed away from the bar, his posture stiffening. "That's enough, Keller. You're crossing a line." "Am I?" Vince's smile was cold. "Or am I getting too close to the truth?" "Tell her, Reeves. Tell her what you know about Operation Shadowfall." The name hit Morgan like a physical blow. Operation Shadowfall, the classified designation for their ill-fated mission. A name that shouldn't be known to anyone outside the direct chain of command. Lucas's face had gone pale. "How do you know that name?" "The same way I know that Reed Harper didn't die in that explosion," Vince replied. "The same way I know that someone high up in the chain of command wanted your team eliminated. And the same way I know that you, Lucas Reeves, were part of the cover-up." Morgan's hand moved to her concealed weapon, her trust in Lucas evaporating. "Is that true?" Lucas's eyes met hers, pain and regret evident in his gaze. "It's not that simple, Morgan." "It never is," she said, the betrayal cutting deep. "Were you involved, Lucas? Did you help set up my team?" "No," Lucas insisted, his voice strained. "I didn't know what was planned. Not until it was too late. By the time I realized what was happening, your team was already in the field. I tried to warn them, but my communications were blocked." "Convenient," Vince remarked. Lucas's attention snapped back to Vince. "And what about you, Keller? You were there. You had access to the base. Your company had connections to the very people who would benefit from silencing Morgan's team." "I was a pawn, just like you," Vince replied. "The difference is I've spent the last 4 years trying to uncover the truth while you've been helping bury it." "Is that why you're here?" Morgan asked, her voice deadly calm. "To uncover the truth? Or to silence the last witness?" Vince turned to her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "If I wanted you dead, Morgan, you would be. The Desert Vipers aren't here to kill you. We're here to protect you." The claim was so unexpected that Morgan almost laughed. Protect me by terrorizing my town by burning down Elena's cafe. A necessary deception, Vince said. We needed to establish our presence, create a believable cover for why we're here. And yes, we needed to get your attention. But the fire was controlled. No one was hurt. That doesn't make it right, Morgan snapped. No. Vince agreed, surprising her again. It doesn't. But when you're hunting ghosts, sometimes you have to become one. What ghosts are you hunting, Keller? Lucas demanded. Vince's expression darkened. The same ones that have been hunting Morgan for the past 4 years. The people who orchestrated the ambush. The people who covered up Reed Harper's final transmission. The people who want to make sure the truth never comes to light. Morgan's mind was racing, trying to process this unexpected shift. If Vince was telling the truth, and that remained a significant if, then the Desert Vipers weren't the threat she'd believed them to be. But that left a more disturbing question. Who was the real enemy? Where's Reed? She asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. If he didn't die in that explosion, where is he now? Vince and Lucas exchanged a look that sent a chill down Morgan's spine. That, Vince said quietly, is the question that could get us all killed. The tension in the room had shifted, realigning along new axes of suspicion and alliance. Morgan found herself in the untenable position of not knowing who to trust. Lucas, her longtime contact who might have been involved in a cover-up, or Vince, a dangerous man with unclear motives who claimed to be her protector. Before she could press for more answers, a sound from the pawn of the bar caught their attention. The soft click of a door opening. All three turned weapons instinctively drawn to find Avery emerging from the storage room, his own gun held steady. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his gaze locked on Vince, but I think we all need to have an honest conversation about Reed Harper and what really happened in Afghanistan. Vince's eyes widened in recognition. Walsh, I wondered when you'd show up. You know each other, Morgan asked, keeping her weapon trained on Vince. We've crossed paths, Avery confirmed, in places neither of us is supposed to talk about. Lucas looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding. He's with you, he said to Morgan. Since when? Since I called him, Morgan replied. After the Desert Vipers showed up in Coyote Springs. Smart move, Vince commented. Avery Walsh was always one of the good ones. The question is, does he know who he's really working with? The accusation hung in the air, its target unclear. Was Vince implying that Morgan was compromised? That Lucas was the threat? Or something else entirely? I think, Avery said, his voice steady, that it's time we all put our cards on the table. No more half-truths, no more accusations without evidence. If Reed Harper is alive, if there's a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of command, then we need to work together to expose it. Morgan looked at the three men, each representing a different piece of her fragmented past. Avery, her former teammate who had arrived at her call without hesitation. Lucas, her contact and supposed ally who might have been involved in a cover-up. And Vince, the enigmatic leader of the Desert Vipers, claiming to be her protector against unseen threats. Avery's right, she decided. Full disclosure, starting with you, Vince. Where is Reed Harper? Vince holstered his weapon slowly, a gesture of trust, or perhaps confidence in his ability to react if threatened. Reed Harper is alive, he confirmed. Or at least he was 3 months ago. Where? Morgan demanded. A private detention facility in North Dakota, Vince replied. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's where certain problems are sent to disappear. And you know this, how? Because I was hired to put him there, Vince admitted. 4 years ago after the ambush. My team was tasked with recovering Reed from the explosion site, alive not dead, and delivering him to a CIA black site. From there, he was transferred multiple times before ending up in North Dakota. You kidnapped him, Lucas said, his voice hard. I followed orders, Vince corrected, the same way you did when you falsified reports about the ambush. The same way Morgan did when she accepted the official explanation for her team's deaths. Morgan's grip on her weapon tightened. And now, what are your orders now? I don't have any, Vince said. Not anymore. The Desert Vipers aren't on anyone's payroll these days. We're independent operators. Then why come to Coyote Springs? Avery asked. Why, now, Vince's expression grew grim. Because 3 months ago, Reed Harper escaped, and according to our sources, he's coming here. To find you, Morgan. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Reed alive. Reed coming to find her. But why? After 4 years, what could he possibly want? Is he a threat? Morgan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Vince admitted. He's been held in isolation for 4 years, subjected to who knows what kind of interrogation techniques. He might not even be the same person you knew. Lucas shook his head. This is insane. If what you're saying is true, then we're dealing with a rogue operative with classified knowledge, potentially unstable heading for a civilian population center. Which is exactly why the Desert Vipers are here, Vince has said, to intercept Reed before he makes contact with Morgan, to figure out what he knows, what he wants, and who might be following him. Morgan lowered her weapon slowly, her mind racing. And the extortion, the threats burning down Elena's cafe, was that all just an act? Not entirely, Vince acknowledged. We needed a believable cover for our presence in Coyote Springs. Being seen as just another outlaw gang gives us freedom to operate without raising suspicions from the wrong people. The wrong people being, Avery prompted. Whoever sent Reed to that black site in the first place, Vince said. Whoever wanted your team eliminated and the truth buried. We still don't know who's pulling the strings, but they have reach. Government reach. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more complex and terrifying than Morgan had imagined. Not just a betrayal by a single person, but a conspiracy that spanned years and involved multiple agencies. A conspiracy that had followed her to Coyote Springs, threatening the new life she had built. So what now, she asked, looking between the three men. Now, Pusili, Vince said, we prepare for Reed's arrival, and we figure out who else might be coming for him. And for you. As if in answer to his words, the distant sound of a helicopter broke the morning stillness, growing louder by the second. All four of them tensed, exchanging alarm glances. That's not local law enforcement, Lucas said, moving to the window. That's military grade. Morgan joined him, her heart sinking as she spotted the black helicopter approaching from the east. No markings, no identification. The kind of transport used for covert operations on U.S. soil. They found us, Vince muttered. Faster than I expected. Who? Morgan demanded. Who found us? But even as she asked, she knew the answer. The same people who had orchestrated the ambush in Afghanistan. The same people who had imprisoned Reed for 4 years. The same people who would kill to keep their secrets. And they were coming for all of them. The ghosts of the past had finally caught up to Morgan Cole, and they were bringing hell with them. The helicopter's rhythmic thrum grew louder, vibrating through the Mirage's windows as it approached. Morgan's mind shifted into combat mode, assessing threats and options with mechanical precision. Back exit, she ordered, already moving. Now. No one argued. In the face of an unknown but clearly professional threat, survival trumped questions. They moved as a unit toward the rear of the bar, Morgan leading with Avery, covering their six. The sound of motorcycles revving outside told her that Vince's men had spotted the helicopter too. My truck's behind the building, Morgan said as they reached the back door. Keys are no time. Vince cut her off. They'll have thermal imaging. They already know exactly where we are. As if to confirm his assessment, the distinctive crack of rifle fire split the air, followed by the ping of bullets striking metal outside. The Desert Vipers were returning fire, buying precious seconds. The basement, Morgan decided. The Mirage had a small cellar accessible through a trap door behind the bar, originally built during Prohibition, now used for storage. Limited access point, solid cover. They doubled back through the kitchen. Morgan yanked up the heavy wooden trap door concealed beneath a worn rug, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. She retrieved a flashlight from beneath the bar and led the way down the others, following in tense silence. The basement was cool and musty, lined with shelves of liquor and supplies. More importantly, its thick concrete walls and single access point made it defensible. This is a kill box, Lucas observed, checking his service weapon. If they find us down here, we're trapped. Better than being exposed up there, Avery countered, taking up position at the foot of the stairs. At least here we have a choke point. The sound of the helicopter had changed. It was hovering now, likely preparing to deploy personnel. The firefight outside intensified, suggesting Vince's men were engaged with whoever had arrived. Morgan's phone buzzed with an incoming text. Elena, armed men in town, black uniforms, no markings. What's happening? Morgan typed quickly. Stay hidden. Don't approach anyone. We'll contact when safe. We need a plan, she said, looking at the three men. We can't stay down here indefinitely. Vince nodded grimly. My men will create a diversion, draw their attention. That might give us a window to slip out the back. And go where? Lucas asked. These people have resources, surveillance tracking capabilities. We won't get far. I have a place, Morgan said, thinking of the hunting cabin where they had examined Maya's files. Remote, defensible, stocked with supplies. Avery shook his head. They'll have drones in the air within minutes. Any vehicle movement will be spotted. So we need to become ghosts, Vince concluded. Disappear where they can't follow. Morgan knew exactly what he meant. The desert. Miles of harsh terrain that satellites could scan, but where heat signatures blurred, where drones struggled against sudden wind patterns, where knowledge of the land trumped technological advantages. The old mining tunnels, she said. They run for miles beneath the mesa, multiple exits, natural ventilation off any official map. Lucas looked surprised. How do you know about those? I explore, Morgan replied simply. 4 years of living in Coyote Springs had given her an intimate knowledge of its surroundings, knowledge that might now save their lives. Getting there is the problem, Avery pointed out. It's 2 miles to the nearest entrance. There's a closer access point, Morgan said. Through the storm drainage system behind the hardware store, it connects to the old mine workings, half a mile mostly underground. The decision was made quickly, necessity eliminating debate. Morgan gathered what supplies she could from the basement: water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, extra ammunition. Avery called up to check on the situation outside, receiving a terse report from one of Vince's men that the helicopter had landed and at least 8 operatives in tactical gear were deploying surrounding the Mirage. Professional hit team, Vince concluded. Military trained, probably ex-special forces, hired by whoever wants us silenced. How did they find us so quickly? Morgan wondered aloud. Lucas and Vince exchanged a look that sent a chill down Morgan's spine. What aren't you telling me? She demanded. Your bar may be bugged, Vince admitted. We swept for basic surveillance when we first arrived in town, but if they're using cutting-edge tech, or someone tipped them off, Avery suggested, his gaze shifting to Lucas. The sheriff raised his hands defensively. If I wanted to bring a hit team down on Morgan, why would I be standing here with you? To maintain your cover, Vince suggested coldly, to make sure the job gets done. Morgan cut through the rising tension. It doesn't matter right now. We need to move before they breach the building. She led them to a narrow section of wall behind the liquor shelves, pushing aside a stack of empty crates to reveal a small door, another relic of the Mirage's Prohibition era, past an escape route for bootleggers caught in a raid. It leads to a crawl space under the building, she explained. Comes out in the alley behind the hardware store. One by one, they squeezed through the opening, finding themselves in a tight, earthen tunnel, barely high enough to crawl through. Morgan went first, using her flashlight sparingly to conserve battery. The air was stale and thick with dust, every movement stirring up particles that caught in their throats and stung their eyes. They had covered perhaps 100 yards when the muffled thump of an explosion reached them, followed by the vibration of the earth around them. They're breaching the bar, Vince muttered from behind Morgan. She pushed forward faster, ignoring the scrapes on her elbows and knees from the rough tunnel floor. The crawl space gradually widened and deepened until they could crouch rather than crawl, eventually opening into a concrete drainage culvert large enough to stand in. This way, Morgan directed, pointing down the sloping tunnel. It runs beneath Main Street and comes out behind the hardware store. They moved quickly through the drainage system, the distant sounds of conflict fading behind them. Morgan led with confidence born of familiarity. She had explored these passages shortly after moving to Coyote Springs, mapping them in her mind as potential escape routes. Old habits from her former life that now proved prescient. After 15 minutes of tense silence, they reached a rusted metal grate that opened onto a dry stream bed behind the hardware store. Morgan peered cautiously through the bars, scanning for any sign of their pursuers. Clear, she whispered, pulling a multi-tool from her pocket to work on the corroded bolts securing the grate. Once outside, they kept to the shadows of the stream bed, moving in a crouch to stay below the line of sight from the main road. The desert stretched before them, red gold in the midday sun, offering both salvation and peril. Without water and shelter, the harsh landscape could kill as surely as any bullet. The mine entrance is there, Morgan said, indicating a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile ahead. In that stand of mesquite. They made it halfway before the distinctive whine of a drone reached their ears. Avery spotted it first, a small quadcopter hovering about 100 feet up its camera, clearly oriented in their direction. "Move," he shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted for the outcropping, aware that their position had been compromised. The drone maintained its distance, tracking their movement with mechanical precision. In the distance, the sound of vehicles racing toward their position spurred them to greater speed. Morgan reached the mine entrance first, a narrow opening partially concealed by scrub brush and decades of erosion. She pushed aside the weathered boards that nominally sealed it and waved the others inside, counting as they passed her Avery, Vince, Lucas. Only when they were all safely inside did she follow, pulling the boards back into place behind her. The darkness enveloped them, broken only by the narrow beams of their flashlights. The air was cooler here, tinged with the mineral scent of earth and old timbers. "They'll have seen us enter," Lucas pointed out, his breathing heavy from the sprint. "Yes," Morgan agreed, "but they won't know where we'll exit. These tunnels cover miles with dozens of access points throughout the mesa." She led them deeper into the mine, past the remnants of old equipment and support structures. The main tunnel branched repeatedly, creating a labyrinth that only someone with extensive knowledge of the system could navigate. Fortunately, Morgan had spent countless hours exploring these passages, finding solace in their quiet darkness during her first months in Coyote Springs. "How much farther?" Vince asked, after they had been walking for nearly 20 minutes. "There's a chamber ahead," Morgan replied. "An old equipment storage area. We can rest there and figure out our next move." The chamber, when they reached it, was surprisingly large, a natural cave that the miners had expanded with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. Rusted equipment lined the walls, and wooden crates were stacked in corners, their contents long since removed. Avery swept the area with his flashlight, checking for hazards or unwelcome inhabitants. "Seems secure enough, at least for the moment." Morgan distributed water bottles from her pack, conserving their limited supplies. "We need to establish priorities," she said. "First, who's after us and why? Second, what Reed Harper has to do with all of this. And third, how we get out of this situation alive." "The who is obvious," Vince said. "Same people who orchestrated the ambush in Afghanistan. Same people who kept Reed imprisoned for 4 years." "But who are they?" Morgan pressed. "CIA, military intelligence, private contractors. All of the above," Lucas suggested, his expression grim. "A coalition of interests that spans agencies and corporations. People who profit from certain conflicts, continuing certain truths remaining buried." Morgan turned to him, suspicion still coloring her perception. "And where do you fit into this, Lucas? You said you were trying to protect me, but you were part of the intelligence apparatus that sent my team to die." Lucas met her gaze steadily. "After your team was ambushed, I started asking questions. The same questions you're asking now. Who authorized the mission? Why was the intelligence so specific yet so fatally flawed? I found inconsistencies, evidence of interference at the highest levels. And instead of reporting it, you buried it," Vince accused. "I was ordered to drop it," Lucas admitted. "When I didn't, I received a very clear message. My younger sister's car was run off the road, a traffic accident that nearly killed her. The message was unmistakable. Stop asking questions, or next time it wouldn't be a warning." Morgan studied him, looking for signs of deception. "So you backed off?" "Outwardly, yes," Lucas nodded. "I accepted the promotion, the transfer. I smiled and nodded at my superiors. But I never stopped looking. I just got more careful about it." "And what did you find?" Avery asked. "Fragments, pieces of a puzzle without enough context to form a complete picture." Lucas sighed. "I know that someone at the Pentagon redirected your mission from its original target to that specific village. I know that Reed Harper filed a report expressing concerns about the intelligence 3 days before you deployed. And I know that report mysteriously vanished from the system before anyone in the chain of command could act on it." Morgan absorbed this information, trying to fit it with what they already knew. "And Reed's final transmission, the warning about betrayal. I never heard it," Lucas admitted. "I was told your team lost contact immediately after reporting enemy contact. It wasn't until months later that I found evidence suggesting otherwise, evidence that communications had continued but were deliberately suppressed." Vince had been quiet, listening with the focused attention of someone comparing new information against an existing mental database. Now he spoke his voice hard. There's a name that keeps coming up in my investigations. A Colonel Nathan Hargrove. Ring any bells? Lucas's expression darkened. Hargrove was the liaison between military intelligence and the CIA for operations in that region. He would have had oversight of mission planning and resource allocation, including reassigning personnel at the last minute. Avery noted the implication, clear he had been pulled from the mission under Hargrove's authority. Hargrove retired with full honors 2 months after the ambush. Lucas continued. Now he works for Cerberus Security Solutions, a private military contractor with extensive government contracts. Cerberus, Morgan repeated the name, triggering a memory. They had personnel at our base. Advisors, they were called. Vince nodded grimly. Cerberus was my employer in Afghanistan. We provided supplementary security for various installations, including your forward operating base. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that chilled Morgan to the bone. So Hargrove orchestrates the ambush from within the system, then retires to a lucrative position with the very company that helped carry it out. The perfect crime. But why, Avery asked, voicing the question that had haunted them all. Why target your team specifically? What were you sent to find, or what were you prevented from finding? Morgan shook her head, the answer still elusive. Whatever it was worth killing 6 operators and imprisoning a 7th to keep it secret. And now Reed Harper is free, Vince added, potentially carrying that secret with him. Which makes him the most hunted man in America, Lucas concluded, and anyone associated with him equally dangerous. The implications hung heavy in the musty air of the mine chamber. They were fugitives now running from a shadow organization with near limitless resources and reach. Their only advantage was their knowledge of the local terrain and the element of surprise their pursuers wouldn't expect them to fight back. We need to find Reed before they do, Morgan decided. He's the key to all of this. If he knows what was really happening in that village, why our team was targeted, he's our best chance of exposing the truth. And staying alive, Avery added. Don't forget that part. Morgan managed a grim smile. That too. Finding Reed won't be easy, Vince pointed out. If he's smart, and he is, he'll be staying off the grid, avoiding surveillance. But he's coming here, Morgan said. To Coyote Springs. To me, which means he'll make contact somehow. Lucas frowned thoughtfully. If I were Reed running from a powerful enemy with extensive surveillance capabilities, I wouldn't approach directly. I'd use a trusted intermediary. Morgan considered this. Who in Coyote Springs would Reed trust as an intermediary? Who would he believe had a connection to her? The answer hit her with stunning clarity. Elena, she breathed. He'd approach Elena. The cafe owner? Avery asked, confused. She's the person in town I'm closest to, Morgan explained. Anyone watching would have noticed that. And with her cafe destroyed, she's vulnerable, potentially receptive to a stranger offering help or information. Lucas nodded slowly. It makes sense. And if these people are as thorough as we think they are, they'll have reached the same conclusion. Fear gripped Morgan's heart, which means Elena is in danger. I need to warn her. She pulled out her phone, but Vince stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. No cell signals. They'll be monitoring all communication in the area. Then we need to reach her in person, Morgan insisted, before they do. It's too dangerous, Avery objected. The moment we leave these tunnels or we're exposed, Morgan fixed him with a determined stare. I'm not leaving her unprotected. Not again. A moment of silent communication passed between them. Avery recognizing the steel in Morgan's voice, the same resolve that had carried her through countless missions. He nodded reluctantly. All right, but we do this smart. They formed a plan, quickly drawing on their collective experience in covert operations. The mine tunnels would take them within a quarter-mile of Sheriff Crawford's house, where Elena was staying. From there, they would move only after dark, using the desert night as cover. What about Sophia? Morgan asked suddenly, remembering Elena's daughter. If they decide to use her as leverage, she's safe in Phoenix, Lucas assured her. Too far away for an immediate grab. And they'll want to keep this contained, avoid drawing attention from larger law enforcement agencies. Morgan nodded, marginally relieved. Okay, we rest here until dusk, then move to extract Elena. As the others settled in to conserve energy for the night ahead, Morgan found a quiet corner of the chamber to be alone with her thoughts. The past 24 hours had shattered the careful isolation she had built around herself, forcing her to confront not only the tragedy of her team's betrayal, but also the connections she had formed despite her best efforts to remain detached. She thought of Elena and Sophia of the Mirage and its regular patrons of the quiet life she had carved out in Coyote Springs. All of it now threatened because of secrets from a past she had tried to outrun. "You okay?" Morgan looked up to find Avery standing nearby, his expression concerned. "Just thinking," she replied. He settled beside her, his presence familiar and comforting, in a way few things were anymore. About Dominic. The question caught her off guard. She and Avery had never discussed her feelings for their former team leader, feelings she had kept carefully hidden. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. Avery's smile was sad. "It was pretty obvious to everyone, except maybe Dominic himself. The way you looked at him when you thought no one was watching." Morgan felt a flush of embarrassment, quickly replaced by a deeper ache of loss. "I never told him." "I know." Avery's voice was gentle. "You always put the mission first. The team first. It's who you are. And now they're all gone." Morgan said the words barely audible. "And I'm still here, still putting the mission first." "That's not entirely true," Avery observed. "The mission now is protecting Elena, protecting this town. That's not duty, Morgan. That's caring." She looked at him, startled by the insight. "You found something here," Avery continued. "Something worth fighting for. That's not a weakness. It's the whole point." Morgan had no response to that. For so long, she had viewed her growing attachment to Coyote Springs as a vulnerability, a chink in the armor she had forged around her heart after Afghanistan. But maybe Avery was right. Maybe caring wasn't the liability she had convinced herself it was. "Get some rest," Avery advised, squeezing her shoulder gently before returning to the others. Morgan leaned back against the cool stone wall, closing her eyes. But sleep remained elusive, her mind too full of the past colliding with the present and the uncertain future that awaited them all. Dusk settled over the desert like a smoky veil, painting the landscape in deepening shades of purple and blue. Morgan led the group through the mine tunnels by the beam of her flashlight, navigating the labyrinthine passages with quiet confidence. They emerged from a long-abandoned air shaft concealed by scrub brush, the fading daylight barely adequate to illuminate their surroundings. "Sheriff Crawford's house is that way," Morgan indicated, pointing toward a cluster of lights in the distance. "About half a mile across open ground." "We'll need to split up," Vince decided. Present multiple targets approach from different directions. Lucas nodded agreement. "I know Bonnie's place. There's a back entrance through her garden, less exposed." They divided quickly. Morgan and Avery would approach from the east, using the shadows of a dry creek bed for cover. Vince and Lucas would circle around to the west, coming in through neighboring properties. Their goal was simple: extract Elena safely and return to the mines before their pursuers could react. As darkness deepened, they separated, each pair moving with the cautious precision of predators in unfamiliar territory. Morgan and Avery kept low, using the natural contours of the land to mask their approach. The lights of Coyote Springs glimmered ahead, deceptively peaceful. "Movement," Avery whispered, freezing in place. 2 o'clock rooftop. Morgan followed his gaze, spotting the silhouette of a figure on the roof of a building at the edge of town, a lookout position for maximum visibility. "They're setting up a perimeter," she murmured, "expecting us to come for Elena." Avery nodded grimly. "Change of plan. We need a diversion." They retreated to a safe distance to communicate with Vince and Lucas via the short-range radios they'd brought from the mine. After a brief consultation, they modified their approach. Lucas would create a distraction at the south end of town, drawing attention away from Crawford's house. Meanwhile, the others would use the opportunity to reach Elena. "Be careful," Morgan told Lucas before they separated again. "These people won't hesitate to kill." "I know," he replied, his expression somber. "But for what it's worth, I'm on your side, Morgan. I always have been." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Whether she fully trusted him or not, they needed his help now. 20 minutes later, they were in position. Lucas's diversion came in the form of a small fire set in an abandoned shed at the southern edge of town, not large enough to endanger nearby structures, but visible enough to demand attention. As predicted, several of the watchers moved to investigate, leaving a gap in their surveillance net. Morgan, Avery, and Vince slipped through this gap, approaching Crawford's modest bungalow from the rear. No lights were visible in the windows, which immediately set Morgan's instincts on edge. Sheriff Crawford was known to leave at least one lamp burning through the night, a habit from her years on the night shift. Something's wrong, Morgan whispered as they reached the back fence. It's too dark. Vince signaled for them to hold position while he conducted a closer reconnaissance. He moved like a shadow across the small yard, checking windows and doors without making a sound. When he returned, his expression confirmed Morgan's fears. No one inside, he reported. Signs of a struggle in the kitchen, blood on the floor. Morgan's heart seized. How much blood? Not enough to indicate a fatal wound, Vince assured her. But someone was hurt. Elena. Morgan breathed fear, giving way to a cold, focused rage. They took her. Or she escaped, Avery suggested, always the optimist. Crawford has a service weapon. Elena might have used it. Morgan wanted to believe this, but the tactical reality was sobering. A civilian against trained operatives had minimal chances even with a firearm. Still, Elena was resourceful. If anyone could find a way out of an impossible situation, it was her. We need to search the house, Morgan decided. Look for any indication of where they might have taken her. They entered through the back door, moving with practiced silence through the darkened rooms. The kitchen showed clear signs of a struggle: overturned chairs, broken glass, smears of blood on the linoleum floor. Morgan knelt to examine a spent shell casing, confirming Avery's theory that a weapon had been fired. In the living room, they found Sheriff Crawford unconscious behind a sofa, a nasty contusion on her forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Avery checked her vital signs, reporting that she appeared to be drugged rather than seriously injured. They wanted her out of the way, not dead, he observed. That's something, at least. Morgan was examining the rest of the room when she noticed something out of place. A small figurine on the mantel had been turned to face the wall. It was a ceramic cactus painted in bright colors, the kind of kitschy souvenir sold in tourist shops. But Morgan recognized it immediately as one of Sophia's art projects, a gift to Sheriff Crawford on her last birthday. Elena left us a message, she said, carefully lifting the figurine. Underneath was a scrap of paper with a hastily scribbled note. M. Old Church, R. Avery read over her shoulder. Read. Well, Morgan nodded, her mind racing. The Old Church. She means the mission ruins outside town. It was a Spanish mission back in the 1700s, abandoned for centuries. Sophia and I explored it once. Could be a trap, Vince warned, if they forced her to write that note. It's not her handwriting, Morgan interrupted, and no one in town calls it the Old Church except Elena and Sophia. It's always the mission ruins to everyone else. The implications were clear. Someone using the initial R, almost certainly Reed Harper, had made contact with Elena. And now they were both at the mission ruins, either hiding or captured. How far? Avery asked. 3 miles northeast of town, Morgan replied. Isolated, minimal cover approaching. But the ruins themselves are extensive, with underground chambers and multiple exit points. Good defensive position, Vince noted with professional appreciation. Or a perfect place for an ambush, Avery countered. Morgan was already moving toward the door. We need to go. Now. Outside, they regrouped with Lucas, who had successfully created his diversion without being detected. He received the news about Elena and Reed with grim determination. The mission ruins are exposed, he warned. If they have aerial surveillance, they'll spot us approaching. Then we don't approach directly, Morgan decided. There's an old waterway and aqueduct system the missionaries built. Parts of it are still intact, running underground for about a peon before reaching the mission complex. You seem to know a lot about local historical sites, Vince observed with mild suspicion. Morgan shrugged. I like to know my surroundings, all possible routes in and out. Once a seal, always a seal, Avery commented with a hint of pride. They made their way back to the edge of town, staying to shadows and avoiding the few locals still out after dark. The diversion had worked. Most of the surveillance team was occupied with the fire, which had spread more than Lucas intended, drawing the attention of Coyote Springs' volunteer fire department as well. The entrance to the aqueduct system was concealed in a dry wash about a mile outside town, a low stone archway half buried by centuries of erosion. Morgan led them inside, where the passage descended steeply before leveling out into a tunnel, large enough to walk upright, though they had to proceed in single file. How did you find this place? Lucas asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Sophia, Morgan replied, the memory bittersweet. She's fascinated by the mission's history. We spent a whole day exploring these tunnels last summer. The thought of Elena's daughter sent a pang through Morgan's chest. Sophia was safe in Phoenix, but for how long? If these people were as ruthless as they appeared, they might see the girl as leverage, a way to control Elena, and by extension, Morgan herself. They continued in silence, the beam of Morgan's flashlight illuminating ancient stonework still solid after centuries. Water had long since ceased to flow through these channels, leaving them dry and dusty, but otherwise remarkably preserved. After nearly 30 minutes of cautious progress, Morgan held up a hand, stopping the group. "We're approaching the mission complex," she whispered. "The aqueduct connects to a cistern beneath the main church building." "How do we play this?" Avery asked, his voice equally low. "Careful reconnaissance first," Morgan decided. "We need to know if Reed and Elena are actually there, and if so, whether they're alone." They continued more slowly, eventually reaching a larger chamber with a high domed ceiling, the cistern that had once stored water for the mission. Stone steps led upward, presumably to the church above. Morgan extinguished her flashlight, allowing their eyes to adjust to the near-total darkness. After a moment, she could make out a faint glow coming from above, not electric light, but the flicker of what might be candles or a small fire. She gestured for the others to remain in the cistern while she investigated. No one argued in this environment. Morgan's stealth skills were unmatched. She ascended the steps silently, every sense hyper-alert for signs of danger. The steps led to a small door set into the floor of what had once been the mission church. Now it was a roofless ruin with stone walls standing like sentinels against the night sky. Morgan eased the door open just enough to peer through. The interior of the church was illuminated by a small campfire in what had once been the altar area. Two figures sat beside it, their faces cast in sharp relief by the dancing flames. One was Elena, looking exhausted but unharmed. The other was a man Morgan hadn't seen in 4 years. Thinner, harder, his face lined with the experiences she could only imagine, but unmistakably Reed Harper. Morgan's heart thundered in her chest. Reed was alive. After 4 years of believing him dead, of carrying the weight of that loss alongside so many others, he was sitting less than 30 feet away, very much alive. She watched for a moment longer, confirming they appeared to be alone before retreating back down the steps to inform the others. "It's them," she reported. "Just the two of them as far as I can see. No signs of coercion or surveillance." "Could be a trap," Vince reiterated. "Reed was in their custody for 4 years. We have no idea what they did to him, what he might have been programmed to do." "I know," Morgan acknowledged, "but we didn't come this far to turn back now." Her decision made, she led them up the steps and into the church proper. She approached the campfire first, making enough noise to alert Reed and Elena to their presence without startling them. Elena looked up, relief washing over her features. "Morgan, thank God!" Reed's reaction was more complex: surprise, wariness, and something like guilt crossing his face in rapid succession. He stood slowly, wincing, as though the movement caused him pain. "Morgan," he said, his voice rough from disuse or emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I got your message," Morgan replied, her own emotions carefully controlled. "Though I have to say, after 4 years of thinking you were dead, a note signed with just your initials seems a bit anticlimactic." A ghost of a smile touched Reed's lips. "Sorry about that. Wasn't sure who might intercept it." The others emerged from the shadows, Avery first, then Lucas, and finally Vince. Reed's posture stiffened at the sight of them, his hand moving instinctively toward what Morgan assumed was a concealed weapon. "Easy," she said. "They're with me." "Are they?" Reed's gaze was particularly sharp on Vince. "You sure about that?" "No," Morgan admitted. "But right now we have bigger problems than sorting out who to trust." Elena stood, moving to Morgan's side. "He saved my life," she said quietly. "They came for me at Bonnie's house, 3 men with guns. Reed got there just before they did, helped me escape." Morgan nodded, some of her tension easing. "Are you hurt?" "Scratches, mostly." Elena shrugged. "Bonnie is alive," Morgan assured her. "Unconscious, but not seriously injured." Relief softened Elena's features. "Good. She tried to protect me, fought like hell until they drugged her." Morgan turned back to Reed, who was still watching the new arrivals with undisguised suspicion. "We need to talk, all of us, about what really happened in Afghanistan and why there's a kill team hunting us now." Reed's expression hardened. "It's a long story, and not a pretty one." "We've got time," Morgan replied, "and we're past caring about pretty." They gathered around the small fire, an unlikely alliance united by circumstance and shared danger. Reed began his tale, his voice strengthening as he spoke of events that had been buried for 4 years. The mission was compromised from the start, he said. We were never sent to find a weapons cache. That village was home to witnesses, civilians, who had seen something they weren't supposed to see, something involving Cerberus security contractors and a classified CIA operation. What operation? Avery asked. Reed's expression was grim. They were testing a new chemical weapon, something that could be deployed without leaving evidence, no residue, no markers that could be traced back to U.S. involvement. The perfect deniable asset for covert operations. Jesus, Lucas breathed. They were using Afghan civilians as test subjects. Reed nodded. A remote village, minimal outside contact, perfect for their purposes. But something went wrong. The effects were more severe than anticipated, more lasting. People started talking, drawing attention. Cerberus needed to eliminate the witnesses and destroy any evidence of what happened there. So they sent us in, Morgan concluded, the horrible truth dawning on her. Not to find weapons, but to be blamed for a massacre they were planning. Exactly, Reed confirmed. We would enter the village allegedly, find the weapons, and then an unfortunate accident would occur. An explosion that would kill everyone, the villagers, our team, all the evidence in one neat package. Cerberus operatives would arrive to investigate, ensure nothing incriminating remained, and file a report blaming the tragedy on insurgent action. But you discovered the truth before the mission, Avery said. Reed's gaze dropped to the fire. I had contacts in the region, locals who trusted me from previous deployments. They warned me about strange deaths in the village, about Cerberus personnel seen in the area. I started digging, found inconsistencies in our mission briefing. I filed a report expressing my concerns. The report that disappeared, Lucas noted. Reed glanced at him sharply. Yes, that's when I knew someone high up was involved. I tried to warn the team directly, but by then we were already in the field, communications monitored. Morgan was scouting ahead when I picked up chatter suggesting an imminent attack. I broke protocol, tried to send a warning to base and to Morgan, but they jammed our communications. Then the explosion. You survived, Morgan said, still processing the revelation that their entire mission had been a setup. How? I was moving toward your position when it happened, Reed explained. The blast knocked me unconscious, but I was far enough away to survive. When I came to Cerberus, contractors were on site. I played dead until they moved on, then tried to find survivors. But there weren't any, Morgan said softly. Except me. Reed's expression was haunted. I saw what was left of the others. There was nothing I could do for them. I was looking for you when Vince's team captured me. All eyes turned to Vince, who met their accusatory stares unflinchingly. It's true, he admitted. My team was tasked with securing the area after the explosion. We found Reed barely conscious, brought him in as instructed. You knew, Morgan demanded, anger flaring. You knew it was a setup. Not then, Vince insisted. We were told it was a classified recovery operation following an insurgent attack. It wasn't until later, when Reed was transferred to a black site rather than a military hospital, that I started to suspect something was wrong. Reed's laugh was bitter. Something was wrong. 4 years of interrogation, isolation, and psychological manipulation, wrong. They wanted to know what I'd discovered, who I'd told. They wanted to be sure their secret was safe. But you escaped, Avery noted. 3 months ago, Reed confirmed. A transfer between facilities provided an opportunity. I've been on the run ever since, gathering evidence, trying to find someone who would listen without immediately reporting to Hargrove or his people. And you came to Coyote Springs to find me, Morgan concluded. Why, after 4 years, why risk everything? Reed met her gaze directly. Because you were the only survivor, the only witness they couldn't control, and because I needed someone I could trust absolutely. The weight of his words settled over Morgan like a physical burden. 4 years she had carried the guilt of surviving when her team did not. 4 years of believing she had somehow failed them by being too far away when the ambush came. Now she learned that her distance had been the only thing that saved her, and that their deaths had been planned from the beginning. The evidence you gathered, Lucas said, breaking the heavy silence. Where is it? Reed reached into his jacket, producing a small metal case. Everything I could find on an Operation Phantom. Research documents, test results, communications between Cerberus and their Pentagon contacts Witness statements from locals who survived the initial tests. Enough to expose them, Avery said. Enough to destroy them, Reed corrected, if we can get it to the right people. Morgan's tactical mind was already working, calculating risks and options. That's why they sent a kill team after us. They can't let this evidence reach the public. Or even certain parts of the government, Lucas added. This operation wasn't sanctioned at the highest levels. It was a rogue action by specific individuals within the military-industrial complex. So we need to get this evidence to someone with the authority and integrity to act on it, Morgan said. Someone beyond Hargrove's reach. I might know someone, Lucas offered. A federal judge I worked with on a cross-jurisdictional case last year. Incorruptible with high-level security clearance and connections to oversight committees. Can you reach him securely? Vince asked. Lucas hesitated. Not from here. Too much risk of interception. We need to get out of the area, Avery concluded. All of us. Somewhere we can transmit this evidence safely. Elena, who had been listening silently to these revelations, spoke up. What about my daughter? If these people are as ruthless as you say, Sophia could be in danger too. The fear in her voice struck Morgan like a physical blow. Elena and Sophia had been drawn into this nightmare through no fault of their own, simply because of their connection to Morgan. The thought of Sophia, bright, curious, innocent Sophia in the crosshairs of people like Hargrove, was unbearable. We'll get her, Morgan promised. We'll bring her somewhere safe, then get this evidence out. How? Reed asked. They'll be watching airports, bus stations, highways. We're trapped. Morgan thought of the vast desert surrounding them, of the knowledge she had accumulated during 4 years of solitary exploration. Not necessarily, she said. There's an old ranch about 60 miles west of here. Abandoned, but the buildings are intact. More importantly, it has a landing strip. You're suggesting we fly out? Vince asked, skeptical. Do you know how to pilot a small aircraft? Morgan asked him. A slow smile spread across Vince's face. As a matter of fact, I do. Then we need to acquire a plane, Morgan stated, as if this were the most reasonable next step in the world. I might be able to help with that, Lucas said. There's a private airfield in Mesquite Junction. Small operation, minimal security. The plan came together quickly, born of necessity and desperation. They would split into 2 teams. Lucas and Vince would go to Mesquite Junction to secure a plane, while Morgan, Avery, Reed, and Elena would travel to Phoenix to retrieve Sophia, then meet at the abandoned ranch for extraction. What about the kill team? Avery asked. They're still out there, still hunting us. We'll have to be careful, Morgan acknowledged. Stay off main roads, avoid surveillance. But they'll be focused on Coyote Springs for now, searching the areas they know about. That gives us a small window of opportunity. As they prepared to move out, Morgan found herself beside Reed, away from the others. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of 4 years of separation and grief hanging between them. I thought you were dead, Morgan said finally, her voice barely audible. All of you. Dominic. Reed's expression softened. He talked about you, you know, in the quiet moments. Never explicitly, but it was there in his voice when he said your name. Morgan felt her throat tighten with unshed tears. We never had the chance to. I know, Reed said gently. For what it's worth, I think he knew how you felt. And I think he felt the same way. It was small comfort after 4 years of regret, but it was something. A confirmation that what she had sensed between them hadn't been merely wishful thinking on her part. When this is over, Reed continued, when the truth is out and these people are brought to justice, what will you do? Morgan hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. Survival had been her only goal since discovering the Desert Viper's presence in Coyote Springs. But now, faced with Reed's question, she found an answer forming in her mind. I'll come back, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. To Coyote Springs, to the Mirage. It's home now. Reed nodded, understanding in his eyes. You found something here worth fighting for. Yes, Morgan agreed, thinking of Elena and Sophia, of the quiet life she had built, of the community she had reluctantly become part of. I did. They rejoined the others, ready to embark on the desperate journey ahead. The night stretched before them, full of danger and uncertainty, but for the first time in 4 years, Morgan felt a fragile hope taking root in her heart. The ghosts of her past had found her, forcing her to confront truths she had tried to bury. But in doing so, they had also given her a chance at something she had thought forever lost: justice for her fallen teammates and perhaps a future beyond the shadows of what had happened in Afghanistan. As they slipped away from the mission ruins, moving like ghosts through the desert night, Morgan cast one last look at the star-filled sky above. Somewhere up there, she liked to think Dominic and the others were watching, waiting for the truth to finally come to light, and she would not let them down. Not again. Not ever.